She was 8 months pregnant when she caught him. Not a rumor, not a suspicion, not a shadow at the edge of her peripheral vision that she could talk herself out of believing. She saw him. Roman Vescari, the man who held her face in both hands at the altar and swore he would burn the world down before he let anything touch her, had his hands on another woman's body outside the hotel, where he'd told Naomi he had a business meeting. And he wasn't just touching her. He was kissing her the way he used to kiss Naomi. Slow, deliberate, like he had all night and intended to use every minute of it. Naomi's hands moved before her brain caught up. She raised her phone. She pressed record. If you've ever loved someone so completely that you stopped being able to see yourself clearly, this story is for you. Before we go any further, if you're new here, please subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss a story like this one. Drop a like if this already has your heart racing, and tell me in the comments what city or country you're best watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Now let's go back to the beginning, because what happened that night was only the first layer of a betrayal that went so much deeper than any affair ever could. The engraved watch had taken Naomi 3 weeks to choose. She'd walked into 4 different jewelers before she found the right one, a clean, elegant timepiece with a dark face and simple gold hands. Nothing flashy. Roman didn't wear flashy things. He wore quiet, expensive objects that communicated power to people who knew how to read them, and nothing to everyone else. That was how he moved through the world, always speaking 2 languages at once, always saying one thing on the surface, while the real meaning traveled underneath. She had his initials engraved on the back, alongside the date of their wedding. Then she'd added 1 line, 4 words that she'd been turning over in her mind for weeks before she finally let the jeweler etch them into the metal. 10 years, still you. She thought it was romantic. She thought he would feel it, that particular combination of sentiment and certainty that she'd always been better at expressing than he was. Roman wasn't a words man. He showed love through action, through a proximity, through the way he would stop whatever he was doing and turn to face her completely whenever she walked into a room. Naomi had learned to read him the same way other people read sentences. She was an expert in Roman Vescari, at least. She believed she was. She had wrapped the watch box herself, silver paper and a clean white ribbon, and carried it in her purse all the way to the downtown Chicago hotel, where Roman had texted her to meet him after his meeting wrapped up. He wanted to take her somewhere nice for their anniversary dinner. He'd made reservations at a restaurant on the 42nd floor. She'd worn the blue dress he bought her in Milan, the one she had, to let out slightly because of the pregnancy, and she'd stood in front of the mirror for longer than she wanted to admit, adjusting the fabric until it fell the way she wanted. 8 months pregnant, and she still wanted to look good for him. That particular detail would come back to haunt her later. She pulled into the hotel's rear parking area because the front entrance valet had a line 3 cars deep, and Naomi didn't like waiting when she was on her feet for long stretches. Her lower back had been complaining since morning. She shifted the car into park and reached for her purse, and that's when she saw the black SUV, Roman's car. She recognized it immediately, the model, the plates, the specific way the tinted windows caught light. She'd been a passenger in that vehicle hundreds of times. She knew it the way you know a shoe that belongs to someone you live with. The driver's side door was open. Roman was standing beside it, and the woman pressed against him was not his assistant, not a business contact, not some ambiguous figure she could reinterpret if she just shifted her angle of vision. It was Bianca Moretti, 27 years old, brown hair, the kind of face that people described as striking rather than pretty, because pretty sounded too small for what she actually was. Naomi had met her twice at company events. She'd thought Bianca seemed sharp, maybe a little too comfortable in Roman's proximity, but she had filed that observation away under things she chose not to examine too closely. She examined it now. They were kissing, not a brief careless contact. Not something that could be explained away as European greeting customs or the particular physical ease of people who worked closely together. It was the kind of kiss that had history inside it, kind that told you this had been happening for a while. Naomi's hand moved. She was barely aware of it. Her fingers found her phone, opened the camera, and pressed record, and she just held it there and let it capture what her mind was struggling to process. The baby moved inside her, a slow roll and kick. The particular sensation, she's peculiar sensations last several months, learning to read like a second language. She pressed her free hand against her stomach without thinking. She didn't cry. She wasn't sure why, exactly. She'd always assumed that if she ever saw something like this, and she hadn't, in 10 years, ever genuinely believed she would fall apart. She'd imagined screaming. She'd imagined throwing things. She'd imagined the kind of total emotional collapse that she'd watched other women go through and always felt a private, guilty relief that it wasn't her. Instead, she sat completely still and recorded 37 seconds of her husband kissing another woman in a hotel parking lot on their 10th wedding anniversary. Then Roman looked up. He saw the car first. Then he recognized it. Then he found her face through the windshield. And in the space of about 2 seconds, Naomi watched a sequence of expressions move across his face that she had never seen there before. Roman Vescari was not a man whose face gave things away. She'd spent a decade learning to read the small signals, the jaw, the hands, the particular stillness that came over him when he was calculating something. He had one of those faces that people who didn't know him described as unreadable. She read it now. First came recognition. Then came something she could only describe as terror. Not guilt, not shame. Terror. The specific fear of a man who has just realized that something very bad has happened, and that the consequences are going to be significant, and that he has no immediate move available to him. She lowered her window. She looked at him for a long moment. "Happy anniversary," she said. Then she raised the window and put the car in reverse. She drove 12 blocks before she realized she was shaking. She pulled into a parking garage on Michigan Avenue and sat on level 2 between a green minivan and a construction company truck, and she breathed. Long, deliberate breaths, the kind her midwife had taught her for labor preparation. In through the nose, out through the mouth. Give the nervous system time to come back down. The baby kicked again. "I know," Naomi said out loud. To no one, to the baby, to herself. She looked at her phone. Already 3 missed calls from Roman. She watched the screen light up with a 4th and pressed the button to silence it. Then she opened her photos, selected the video, and emailed it to herself. Then she texted it to a private backup account she used for business documents. Then she uploaded it to the cloud storage app she used for client files. She wasn't thinking clearly, not exactly. But something underneath the shock was operating on instinct, and that instinct said, "Secure the evidence." She wasn't sure yet why that word came to her. Evidence. It was a legal word, a courtroom word, but it was the word that arrived in her mind without invitation, and she let it stay. Roman's calls kept coming. After the 7th one, a text appeared instead. "Please come home. Let me explain. This is not what it looked like." Naomi stared at that last sentence for a long time. Then she typed back, "I have the video, Roman. Don't tell me what it looked like." His response was almost immediate. "Come home. We need to talk." She stayed in the parking garage for another 20 minutes. Called her friend Tessa Monroe, who answered on the second ring, because Tessa always answered on the second ring, and when Naomi told her what happened, there was a long silence on the other end that felt more honest than any immediate response would have. "Where are you right now?" Tessa finally asked. "Michigan Ave garage." "Level 2. Don't go home yet." "I know. I mean it, Naomi. Don't go home until you've had time to think." "I know." She paused. "I need you to do something for me. I need you to look up the name of a family law attorney. Someone outside Roman's usual circles. Someone he doesn't know." Another silence. "Okay," Tessa said carefully. "How serious are we talking right now?" Naomi looked down at her hand on her stomach. She thought about the watch in her purse with its engraved back. 10 years still you." "I don't know yet," she said. "But I want the number before I go home." She went home 2 hours later. Roman was waiting in the front room. He'd changed out of the clothes she'd seen him wearing in the parking lot, which she noticed immediately, and which told her something about how his mind worked. He'd had time. He'd used it to prepare. He started talking before she'd fully closed the door. "I know what you saw. I know how it looked. I need you to let me explain because there's context here that you don't have, and I need you to sit down and give me 10 minutes before you." "I don't need to sit down," Naomi said. She walked past him to the kitchen island, set her purse down, and turned to face him. She was aware, distantly, of how strange the room looked to her. The same kitchen she'd cooked in 1,000 times. The same countertops, the same light fixture, the same framed photograph on the wall from a trip they'd taken to Sardinia 3 years ago. Everything exactly as she'd left it. Nothing matching how she felt. "Give me your explanation," she said. "Bianca and I, it's complicated." "It started how long?" "Roman, how long?" His jaw moved. 14 months. Naomi had expected months. She had not expected 14. There was a difference between an affair and a relationship, and 14 months was well across that line. She had been pregnant during 14 months. She had told him about the pregnancy during those 14 months. They had chosen the baby's name, argued gently over the nursery, attended 2 ultrasounds together during those 14 months. She kept her face very still. "All right," she said. "Naomi, I heard you. 14 months. She picked her purse back up. "I'm going to go upstairs. We can talk more tomorrow." "I need you to give me your phone," he said. She stopped. She turned around slowly. Roman Vescari had a particular way of making requests that made them sound like inevitabilities rather than questions. It was a quality that had once made her feel safe, the sense that he was someone who handled things, who moved immovable objects when necessary, who never asked for anything he wasn't confident he could obtain. She had spent 10 years interpreting that quality as protectiveness. Standing in her kitchen with her hand on her purse strap, she felt it land differently. "My phone," she said. "The video. I need you to delete it." "Why? Because it's not just about Bianca." He moved closer. "There are things in the background of that recording that can't be in circulation. That parking lot, the people who were nearby there, are implications here that go beyond the two of us. And I need you to understand that keeping that video is dangerous." "Dangerous for who?" He looked at her for a long moment. "For both of us," he said, "but especially for you." She held his gaze. She thought about the way he'd looked in that parking lot when he first saw her. The terror. She'd cataloged it and set it aside while she was trying to process everything else, but it came back to her now with new clarity. He hadn't looked like a man caught cheating. He'd looked like a man who just realized something had gone badly wrong. "I'm not giving you my phone," she said, "and I'm not deleting anything." She walked upstairs. She lay in the guest room with the door locked and the engraved watch on the nightstand beside her. She'd taken it out of her purse. At some point, she couldn't remember exactly when, and she looked at it for a long time, in the dark. 10 years, still you. The baby moved. She pressed her hand against her stomach and stared at the ceiling and let herself feel fully, for the first time since the parking garage, how much this hurt. Not the abstract hurt of betrayal in concept. The specific, physical, nauseating pain of learning that the person you organized your entire existence around had been conducting a separate life for 14 months, had looked at you every morning and chosen to maintain the lie, had held your pregnant body while you slept, and continued to be somewhere else entirely in the hours when your eyes were closed. She did not cry. She wanted to. She thought maybe the crying was stuck somewhere, blocked by something, and that it would come eventually when the shock finished moving through her. But in that room on that night, it did not come. Instead, she thought about what he'd said. There are things in the background of that recording that can't be in circulation. She picked up her phone. She watched the video again, 3 times, more carefully, each time. She saw Roman. She saw Bianca. She saw the hotel entrance and the parking area and the black SUV with its door still standing open. She saw, at the edge of the frame, a second man, standing near the hotel's service entrance with a bag at his feet. She almost missed him. He was partially obscured and not moving, but he was there. She didn't recognize him. She didn't know what the bag contained. She didn't know what Roman had meant. But she knew, with the same instinct that had told her to secure the video, before she'd consciously processed why that whatever Roman was actually afraid of had nothing to do with Bianca. The affair was the thing he'd gotten caught doing. The fear was about something else entirely. She put the phone face down on the nightstand. She breathed the way her midwife had taught her. She listened to the quiet of the house around her, the distant settlement sounds of the walls, the distant hum of the street outside, and she decided something. She was not going to give him the phone. She was not going to delete the video. And tomorrow morning, before Roman had a chance to set the terms of whatever came next, she was going to call the attorney whose number Tessa had texted her from the parking garage. She had spent 10 years being excellent at understanding Roman Vescari. It was time to use everything she knew. She didn't sleep. Not really. She drifted in and out of something that resembled sleep, the way a puddle resembles a lake, shallow cold, and gone the moment you tried to step into it. Twice she woke to the sound of Roman's footsteps outside the guest room door, slow and deliberate, the particular rhythm of a man who wanted her to know he was there, without committing to knocking. Third time she heard him, around 3 in the morning, she sat up in the dark and put her hand flat against the door and waited. The footsteps stopped. She could feel him on the other side of that door. 10 years of marriage, and she knew his stillness the way she knew his voice. Neither of them moved for almost a full minute. Then the footsteps retreated down the hall, and Naomi lay, back down on top of the covers, with her hand on her stomach, and looked at the ceiling until the room started to go gray with early light. She called the attorney at 7:45. Her name was Patricia Hale, and Tessa had described her as someone who didn't lose sleep over difficult clients or difficult opponents, which was the closest Tessa ever got to saying someone was formidable. She had an office in the West Loop, and a voice on the phone that was brisk without being cold, the voice of someone who had heard a great many things, and found very few of them surprising. Naomi gave her the short version: anniversary night, parking lot, the recording, Roman's demand for the phone, the 14 months. Patricia Hale listened without interrupting. "You said he specifically used the word dangerous," she said when Naomi finished. "He said keeping the video was dangerous, especially for me." Did he elaborate? No. He mentioned something in the background of the recording. Person, I think. He didn't explain. A brief pause. "All right. I need you to do 3 things before we meet in person. First, don't delete anything off that phone. Second, don't sign anything Roman or anyone connected to him puts in front of you. Third, don't discuss the video with him again until you've spoken to me. Can you do all 3? Yes, good. Can you come in at 11? She could. She got dressed in the bathroom with the door locked, which felt like a architecture for a house she'd lived in for 7 years. She could hear Roman downstairs, the particular sounds of him, in the morning. Coffee machine, the low murmur of his phone calls that had always started before 8. Those sounds had been the backdrop of her mornings for a decade. They landed differently now. Everything in the house was landing differently. The way a room looks after you've been told bad news inside it. She came downstairs with her coat already on. Roman was at the island with a coffee cup and his phone face down on the counter. And when she came into the kitchen, he straightened in a way that told her he'd been listening for her footsteps. His eyes moved to her coat, her purse, the car keys already in her hand. "Where are you going?" "Out." "Naomi, I have an appointment." He put the coffee cup down. "With who?" She looked at him. He was still wearing the careful expression he'd had last night, the controlled, managing expression of a man running a negotiation. She'd seen that expression in rooms full of powerful people. She'd always found it reassuring when it was directed at other people. When it was directed at her, standing in her own kitchen, at 8 in the morning, after the worst of her life, it made something cold move through her chest. "That's my business," she said. "I'd like to know where my pregnant wife is going." "I'm sure you would." She walked to the door. He followed her, not blocking her path, but close enough that she was aware of his size in the way she rarely was anymore. Roman was a large man, not aggressive in his physical presence, not the kind of man who used his body to intimidate in obvious ways. But she understood suddenly, and with uncomfortable clarity, why other people found him imposing, in ways she'd always been able to overlook. "I want to work through this," he said. "I know what I did. I'm not pretending otherwise, but I need you to talk to me before you do anything. I'll talk to you when I'm ready to talk to you." She opened the door. "Patricia Hale," he said. She stopped. She turned around slowly. Roman's face had changed. Not much, just enough. The careful management was still there, but something underneath it had shifted, and what she saw beneath it was not quite what she expected. Not anger. Something more calculated than anger. "How do you know that name?" she asked. "Because I know who Tessa Monroe calls when someone she loves needs insulation from a difficult situation." He said it evenly, not as a threat, almost as a statement of logistics. "Patricia Hale is good. She's also someone I've interacted with professionally on 2 occasions. I'd like you to consider whether that's the position you want to put yourself in." Naomi stood in the open doorway, the morning air coming in behind her. "Are you threatening me?" she asked. "I'm asking you to think carefully." "That's not an answer. It's the only one I have right now." She left. She drove to Patricia Hale's office with both hands on the wheel and the radio off, and the kind of focused quiet in her head that she recognized from high-pressure event deadlines, the state she reached when everything non-essential fell away, and she operated on pure, clear purpose. She'd always been good in crisis. Roman used to say that about her, with a particular warmth that she'd taken as a compliment. She understood now that he'd also been taking notes. Patricia Hale was exactly what Tessa's description had suggested. 60-something, reading glasses on a chain, a desk that was organized in the particular way of someone who processed a high volume of complex information and couldn't afford disorder. She listened to Naomi's full account without a single unnecessary word, made notes on a legal pad, and then sat back and looked at her with the unhurried directness of someone who was going to say something worth hearing. When he mentioned things in the background of the recording, she said, "Did your husband seem afraid of legal exposure? Or afraid of something else?" Naomi thought about it, about the exact expression on Roman's face in the parking lot, the 14 months of control and calculation that had preceded it. He seemed afraid of things getting out of his control, she said, which for Roman is the same thing as being afraid. Patricia nodded slowly. "I want to ask you something, and I want you to take a moment before you answer. In the years you've been married, have you had any involvement in Roman's business interests, either directly or through your own company?" "I have my own event planning company. I started it 5 years ago. Roman helped me with initial connections, vendor relationships, venue introductions, that kind of thing. Has he ever asked you to process payments through your company on his behalf?" Something shifted in Naomi's chest, not quite a new feeling, more like the arrival of a feeling that had been waiting in a back room for a while. "He's referred clients to me," she said carefully. "Some of them have been connected to his business interests. Large payments? Some of them, yes. Event planning at a certain scale involves significant vendor contracts." Tricia looked at her for a moment. "Have you reviewed your company's financial records recently? Full records, every vendor payment, every contract, every account that has touched your books in the last 3 or 4 years?" "Not a comprehensive review." "No, I'd like you to do that," Patricia said. "Before our next meeting, I'd like you to pull everything you can access and look at it carefully. Not for anything specific. Just look. What am I looking for?" Patricia picked up her pen. "You'll know when you see it." Naomi drove home with that sentence sitting in the front of her mind. She knew when she arrived that something was wrong before she opened the door. Particular quality of stillness that in the house was different from the morning's quiet. She pushed the door open and found Valentina Vescari standing in her front room. Roman's mother, 71 years old, silver-haired, dressed as though she had a standing appointment somewhere important. Valentina Vescari had the bearing of a woman who had spent decades making rooms feel smaller simply by entering them. She was not a tall woman. She was not loud. She communicated authority through the particular stillness of someone who had never, in living memory, done anything without a reason. Beside her stood a man Naomi recognized as Leonard Ferris, the Vescari family's long-standing attorney. Thin, gray-suited, carrying the leather portfolio he brought to every meeting, where documents were expected to change hands. Roman was standing by the window. He hadn't looked at Naomi when she came in. "Naomi," Valentina said. With the particular warmth she reserved for family members, she considered a liability. "Sit down, please. We have a few things to discuss." "I'll stand," Naomi said. "How did you get into my house?" "Roman let us in. This is my house too, Valentina." "Yes," the older woman said. "That's actually one of the things we're here to discuss." Leonard Ferris opened his portfolio. Naomi looked at Roman. He was still looking at the window. She watched him for a moment and understood, with a clarity that cut cleanly through whatever was left of the morning's numbness, that this had been arranged. That the meeting at Patricia Hale's office had, however it had registered in Roman's mind, had accelerated a timeline he'd already been preparing. "I don't want to hear anything from your attorney," Naomi said, "until I have mine present." "That's a very aggressive posture for a conversation that hasn't started yet," Valentina said. "Your son came home last night and asked me to delete video evidence and hand over my phone. That's the posture I'm in." A beat of silence. Leonard Ferris closed his portfolio, the specific unhurriedness of a man who had been in many rooms where things were said that people later wished they could take back. "Naomi." Valentina's voice dropped into the register she used when she was done performing warmth. "I understand you're hurt. I understand the situation is painful. But this family has spent 30 years building something that extends far beyond your marriage. And whatever you are feeling right now, I need you to think carefully before you let those feelings become actions that can't be undone." "Are you protecting the family name?" Naomi asked. "Or the family money?" Valentina's expression didn't change. That was always the tell with her, not what her face did, but the half-second delay before it did anything at all. "Both," she said, same as always. "Roman," Naomi said without looking away from Valentina. "Tell your mother and her attorney to leave my house." Silence. Valentina looked at her son. Roman finally turned from the window. He looked tired in a way that Naomi hadn't seen on him before, or hadn't recognized for what it was. Not the exhaustion of a man who hadn't slept. The exhaustion of a man who had been carrying something heavy for a long time, and was beginning to feel the weight. Mommy said. Valentina held her position for 2 full seconds. Then she picked up her bag from the chair where she'd set it. Leonard Ferris closed the portfolio all the way and tucked it under his arm. Think carefully, Valentina said to Naomi as she moved toward the door. Whatever you believe Roman has done, and I'm not here to argue that there are other people involved in the things you're considering. People who are not as patient as I am. The door closed. Naomi and Roman stood in the front room of their house with the kind of silence between them that has texture to it. Was that a threat? She asked. My mother doesn't threaten people. Your mother just told me that there are impatient people connected to whatever is actually going on here. She turned to face him fully. Roman, I need you to tell me what is actually going on here. He sat down heavily on the arm of the couch. He rubbed the back of his neck, and for a moment, just a moment, she saw through the constructed management to the man underneath, and he looked older than she remembered, and more afraid. Video, he said. The man in the background. His name doesn't matter. What matters is that he was there to receive something. A transfer of documents connected to a property deal we needed to keep quiet. The timing it was bad timing. I didn't know you were coming. What kind of documents? He looked at her steadily. The kind that would be very interesting to federal investigators if they surfaced. The room was very quiet. And you think the video captures enough to be a problem, she said. I think the right person looks at that footage carefully enough. They can put together that the exchange happened, which opens questions I don't want opened. Naomi sat down in the chair across from him. The baby shifted, a rolling movement under her ribs, and she breathed through it. How long have you been running document transfers through property deals? She asked. He looked at her sharply. I'm not stupid, Roman. I've been sitting next to you for 10 years. I'm asking you how long. That's not a conversation we should be having without attorneys present. That's an answer, she said. She stood up and went upstairs. She closed the bedroom door, the real bedroom, the one they'd shared for 7 years, and she opened the laptop she kept on the desk in the corner. She pulled up the full accounting records for Sterling Events, her company, and she started reading. She read for 4 hours. It took her 40 minutes to find the first anomaly. A vendor payment from 2.5 years ago. A catering company she didn't recognize. For an event she had no record of planning. The amount was significant. Her signature or something that looked very much like her signature appeared on the associated contract. She went deeper. The more she looked, the worse it got. There were 9 separate transactions across 3 years, all connected to vendors she either didn't recognize or had used only once for minor services. The amounts ranged from $40,000 to $280,000. Her signature appeared on every document. In 2 cases, her company's tax identification number had been used to process the payments. Her hands were shaking by the time she got to the end. She sat back and looked at the ceiling. Roman had been routing money through her company. Not clumsily, not obviously. It was done with the particular care of someone who understood that a certain volume of transactions would not trigger attention on their own, who had threaded irregular payments through the legitimate financial activity of a real business so that any cursory examination would find nothing. But it was there, if you knew what you were looking at, and her signature was on all of it. She thought about what Patricia Hale had said. You'll know when you see it, she called Tessa. I need you to come over, she said when Tessa picked up. Now, are you okay? Is the baby? We're both fine. But I need you here. Tessa arrived in 25 minutes. Naomi met her at the door and walked her upstairs without explanation. Roman was in his office on the ground floor. She could hear his voice, another phone call, low and continuous, the sound that had been the wallpaper of her marriage. She showed Tessa the records. Tessa went very still. She was a financial analyst. She'd spent 15 years reading numbers for a living, and she moved through Naomi's records with the focused attention of someone who knew exactly what she was looking at. When she finished, she looked up at Naomi over the top of the laptop screen. These aren't mistakes, Tessa said quietly. No, someone prepared these documents. Someone who knew how your business operated, who knew your vendor relationships, your contract templates, your signature style. She paused. Someone who had access to everything. He encouraged me to keep the business small, Naomi said. He always framed it as protecting me, not wanting me to be overwhelmed, especially during the pregnancy. He offered to help manage vendor relationships. He said it was because he had connections I didn't. Tessa looked at her. He was keeping it manageable, Naomi said, so he could manage it. The word Naomi had used in the parking garage came back. Evidence. She understood now, fully, why her instincts had chosen that word before her conscious mind could catch up. Roman hadn't just been having an affair. He had been building a structure in which, if anything ever came apart, the financial irregularities would point to Naomi's company. Her name, her signature, her tax identification number. He had been preparing to sacrifice her. The affair had broken her heart. This was something else. She sat with that for a long moment. Long enough for Tessa to close the laptop gently and not say anything, which was what you did when someone needed to arrive somewhere on their own. Then Naomi stood up and picked up her phone and called Patricia Hale's after-hours line. "I found something," she said when Patricia answered. "How significant? Significant enough that I need to meet with you tomorrow morning. First thing." A brief pause. "All right, 8 o'clock. Bring everything you can print." She hung up. She looked at Tessa. "I need you to help me print everything," she said. "Every record I can access. Before Roman has any reason to think I've been in the accounts." "You think he'd lock you out?" She thought about the frozen joint account she didn't know about yet, the deal she hadn't been offered yet, the particular infrastructure of control that was still, in this moment, partially invisible to her. She didn't know the details, but she knew Roman. "Yes," she said. "I think he would." They spent 3 hours printing. At 2 in the morning, Tessa left with a sealed envelope of physical copies stored in the trunk of her car. Naomi kept a second set in a folder in the back of her closet behind winter coats that hadn't been touched since February. Lowy. Then she went downstairs. Roman was still in his office. The door was open. He was sitting at his desk with a glass of something untouched in front of him. Not on his phone, not on his computer, just sitting in the particular stillness of a man who was doing arithmetic and not liking what the numbers kept adding up to. He looked up when she appeared in the doorway. She looked at him for a long moment. She thought about 10 years, about the watch upstairs on the nightstand in the guest room, about the man who'd held her face at the altar, about the particular cruelty of loving someone so completely that you stopped running the numbers, stopped checking the accounts, stopped noticing the shape of the trap being built around you because the person building it was also the one who held you at night. "I know about the account," she said. His face went very still. "I know about the vendor payments. I know my signature is on documents I never signed. I know what it would look like to an investigator." She kept her voice level. She was proud of how level it was. "I know why you wanted me to keep the business small. I know why you managed the vendor relationships. I know what you were building." He didn't deny it. That was the thing she would remember longest. Not what he said, but what he didn't say. In the silence that followed, Roman Vescari, who had built an empire on never having nothing to say, simply looked at his wife and said nothing at all. "I'm going to bed," Naomi said. "Tomorrow I'm meeting with my attorney. And Roman," she paused in the doorway, "if you try to lock me out of any account, any record, or any asset connected to my company, I will make sure that conversation with Patricia Hale includes everything I printed tonight. Every document, every payment, every forged signature." She walked upstairs. She lay down in the guest room, and this time, finally, the tears came, not the dramatic collapse she'd expected, but something quieter and more honest. The kind of crying that doesn't make much noise because it's been building long enough that the pressure is the thing, not the release. She cried for the marriage, for the version of Roman she'd loved. For the 10 years she'd spent believing that the darkness surrounding his world had never reached inside their home. She cried until she was empty. Then she stopped. She put her hand on her stomach and felt the baby move slow, small, certain, and she thought, "Whoever you are in there, I am not going to let anyone make you a piece in someone else's game. Not even your father." The next morning, she arrived at Patricia Hale's office 8 minutes early, with a folder 3 inches thick and the specific, grounded calm of a woman who has passed through the worst of the shock and arrived at something harder and more durable on the other side. Patricia looked at the folder. Then she looked at Naomi. "Tell me everything," she said, and Naomi did. Patricia Hale read every page. She didn't rush. She didn't skim. She turned each sheet with the deliberate attention of someone who understood that the difference between a problem and a catastrophe often lived in a single line of a single document. and she was not going to miss it because she was moving too fast. Naomi sat across from her and watched the morning light change on the wall behind Patricia's desk and kept her hands flat on her thighs to stop them from doing the anxious thing they wanted to do. It took 40 minutes. When Patricia set the last page down, she removed her reading glasses and set them on the desk beside the folder and looked at Naomi with an expression that was not alarmed and not reassuring, but was instead the specific look of a professional who has just confirmed something she already suspected and is now calculating the best route forward. "How many people know you pulled these records?" she asked. "Tessa Monroe. She helped me print them. And Roman knows I know about the accounts I told him last night." "Told him?" "I needed him to know that I knew." Patricia pressed her lips together briefly, not disapproval, more like the involuntary response of someone recalibrating around a new variable. "That changes the timelines somewhat. He's had overnight to think about what you have and what you might do with it." She picked up her pen. "Walk me through your company structure. Who has administrative access to your accounts? Who can generate vendor contracts under your letterhead?" Naomi walked her through it. The company was small, 5 full-time employees, 2 part-time contractors, a bookkeeper named Della who came in twice a week and had been with Naomi since year 1. The vendor relationships were managed primarily by Naomi herself, occasionally by her operations manager, a woman named Cora Sutton, who had joined Sterling Events 3 years ago. Patricia stopped writing. 3 years ago, she said. "Yes. The first irregular payment in your records is dated 2 years and 8 months ago." Naomi heard it land before she fully processed it. The way you hear a sound and know what it means before your brain supplies the word. Cora came with a referral from one of Roman's business contacts, Naomi said slowly. He said she was overqualified for the position, but looking to scale back from corporate work. He said she was reliable. "Has she had access to your contract templates, your vendor database, your signature files?" The room felt smaller than it had 60 seconds ago. "Yes," Naomi said, "to all of it." Patricia wrote something on the legal pad. "I'm going to need you to compile everything you have on Cora Sutton. Employment records, references, any communications between her and Roman that you're aware of." She set the pen down. "And I need to tell you something clearly, Naomi, so that you understand the shape of what we're dealing with here. The financial irregularities in your company records, if examined by federal investigators, would look on their surface like your operation was being used for money laundering. The forged signatures, the vendor payments, the use of your tax identification number. This is not the work of someone who got careless. This is a prepared structure. Someone built this, specifically, so that if scrutiny ever arrived, it would arrive at you first." The words were not new. Naomi had put them together herself, alone in the guest room at 2 a.m. But hearing them in someone else's voice, laid out in the flat, neutral language of legal assessment, made them real in a different way. "He was going to let me take it," she said. "The structure was in place to allow that outcome. Yes. Pregnant. I was carrying his child, and he was building a financial crime around my company name." Patricia didn't look away from her. Yes, Naomi sat with that. Not for long. She couldn't afford long. But she sat with it long enough to feel the full weight of it, because she'd learned somewhere in the last 36 hours that moving past something without fully feeling it was how you ended up blindsided by it later. She felt it. The betrayal that made the affair look almost incidental by comparison. Cold, strategic patience of a man who had looked at the woman he married and calculated how useful she could be as a shield. Then she put it somewhere she could carry it without it carrying her. "What do I need to do?" she asked. "First, we preserve everything. I'll have a paralegal contact you this afternoon about secure digital storage offsite, outside any network Roman or his associates could access. Second, I want you to behave as normally as possible at home. Don't let Roman know you've been here this morning. Don't let him know how much you've shared with me." Third, Patricia paused. "Is there anyone in Roman's inner circle who might talk to you? Anyone whose interests might not be entirely aligned with his?" Naomi thought about it. She thought about Bianca Moretti. She thought about the second look she'd taken at Bianca in the parking lot recording, beyond the initial shock. Bianca had not looked like a woman in control of the situation. She'd looked like a woman who was present in a situation that had more dimensions than she fully understood. "Maybe," Naomi said. "Find out," Patricia said carefully. Naomi drove home through mid-morning traffic with the particular focused blankness that had become her default state, a kind of enforced calm that sat on top of everything, churning underneath. She was 3 blocks from the house when her phone rang. Not Roman, Bianca. She stared at the name on the screen for 2 full rings. Then she pulled over and answered. "How did you get this number?" Naomi asked. Pause. Bianca's voice, when it came, was lower than Naomi expected. "More careful. Roman's phone. He has your contact saved. I know this is not what you want. I know you have every reason to hang up. But I need to talk to you, and I don't have anyone else I can call." "You need to talk to me," Naomi said. "Yes. The woman you've been sleeping with for 14 months needs to talk to me." "I know how that sounds. I don't think you do." Naomi's voice came out very steady. She was almost surprised by it. "Give me one reason I shouldn't hang up right now." Another pause, longer this time. Then Bianca said, "Because Roman told me last week that if the investigation ever surfaces, he's going to tell them I moved the documents voluntarily, that I knew what they were and I chose to participate. He has emails that look like I initiated the transfers." Her voice was steady but thin, the steadiness of someone holding themselves together through effort rather than ease. "He set me up the same way he set you up. I just figured it out later than you did." Naomi said nothing. "I have messages," Bianca said. "Text messages from Roman about you, about what he planned to do if anyone started asking questions about the accounts." He said she stopped. "He said you had a history of emotional instability, that the pregnancy had made it worse, that if anyone looked at the company records and found the irregularities, it would be consistent with someone in your state making bad decisions." Cold that moved through Naomi's chest then was different from the cold of betrayal. It was the specific cold of understanding the full dimensions of something you'd previously only seen one face of. He hadn't just been building a financial structure to redirect blame. He'd been building a character narrative, a version of Naomi unstable, overwhelmed, emotionally compromised by pregnancy that would make the investigator's path of least resistance lead directly to her. He was going to say, "I did it, because I was falling apart," she said. "Yes." Bianca's voice dropped further, "and I was going to be the witness who confirmed it. My access to the documents, my role in the transfers, he was going to reframe all of it as me acting on your instructions, following your direction, because I was your employee, in the narrative he was preparing to give them. But I don't employ you. You work for Roman. I work for the holding company, which is structured so that on paper, during the period of the transfers, I can be characterized as a contractor with reporting access to sterling events." She paused. "He's thorough." I didn't understand how thorough until recently. Naomi stared through the windshield at the street in front of her. A woman was walking a small dog. A delivery truck was double parked. Everything ordinary. Everything going about its business in the full, indifferent daylight. "I want to meet with you," Naomi said. "I thought you would." "Not at the house. Not anywhere Roman would know about. There's a coffee place on Randolph. 12:30. "I can be there 12:30, Naomi said. She hung up and sat for a moment. Then she called Patricia Hale. "Bianca Moretti just called me," she said. Patricia's response was immediate. "Don't meet her without telling me first." "I'm meeting her at 12:30, a beat." "Where?" "Coffee shop on Randolph." "Okay. Don't record the conversation without proper disclosure. Illinois is a 2-party consent state. But take notes afterward, as detailed as you can manage, immediately after you leave. And Naomi, be careful. She may be reaching out because she genuinely wants to cooperate. She may also be reaching out because Roman sent her. You understand the difference in those 2 situations?" "Yes," Naomi said. "I grew up watching men use women as their advance team. I know what it looks like." She drove the rest of the way home. Roman was not in the house when she arrived. His car was gone. She stood in the front room for a moment, listening to the emptiness, and then went upstairs, changed clothes, ate something she tasted approximately none of, and sat at the desk in the bedroom, going through her company email with the systematic attention of a woman looking for evidence that her operations manager had been a planted instrument of her husband's financial strategy. She found it in 40 minutes, not in the payments themselves. Those were in the accounting system, not email. But in the communication patterns, Cora Sutton had sent 43 emails to an address Naomi didn't recognize over an 18-month period, a private Gmail account with a name that meant nothing. But the timing of those emails corresponded exactly with the periods surrounding each of the 9 irregular vendor payments. Before each payment, a cluster of emails to the unknown address. After each payment, nothing for weeks. She photographed every screen. She was in a car heading toward Randolph Street at 12:15. Bianca was already there when she arrived. She was sitting at a small table near the back, with a coffee she hadn't touched, wearing a dark coat that was slightly too large for her, and she looked, Naomi thought, walking toward her, like someone who had not slept in considerably longer than one night. The striking face that Naomi remembered from the company events looked stripped of its self-possession. What was left underneath was younger and more frightened than Naomi expected. She sat down across from her. They looked at each other. "Thank you for coming," Bianca said. "Don't thank me," Naomi said. "Talk." Bianca wrapped both hands around her coffee cup. "I met Roman 2 years ago, at a property event his company hosted. He was." She stopped herself. "I know you don't want the explanation of how it happened." "No. I want to know about the messages." "Right." She reached into her coat pocket and set her phone on the table between them. "I've been screenshotting everything since last week when I started to understand what he was building. But there are older messages too. I'll start from the beginning." She unlocked the phone and slid it toward Naomi. Naomi read. She read for a long time. The messages were not dramatic. That was the thing about them. They were not the messages of a man ranting or threatening or performing villainy. They were the messages of a man managing logistics, and that was worse. Calm, specific, quietly directing. In one exchange from 8 months ago, Roman instructed Bianca on how to move a specific document set through Sterling Events' vendor system, using a template she should access from Cora's shared drive. He used the words "keep it clean," and Naomi's bookkeeper doesn't look at the quarterly vendor summaries. Until February we have time. In another, from 4 months ago, he wrote, "If this ever comes up, the story is simple. You were following direction from company management. Keep it vague. They'll fill in the blanks themselves." And then, the message from last week. Bianca had flagged it with a red marker in her screenshots. Naomi read it twice. If the situation becomes visible, the priority is protecting the holding company and the family assets. The exposure path runs through Sterling Events and the woman running it. The documentation supports that narrative fully. Your role gets characterized as contractor level, acting on instruction. My mother's attorneys have already prepared the framework. You cooperate with that account and you walk away. You deviate from it, and the emails where you acknowledge the transfers become the story instead. Naomi set the phone down on the table. She pressed both hands flat on the surface. She could feel her own pulse in her fingertips. My mother's attorneys have already prepared the framework. Valentina. She had stood in Naomi's front room the previous morning with Leonard Ferris and his leather portfolio, and she had said, "Think carefully," with the particular warmth of a woman, dispensing the most specific kind of warning. And Naomi had understood it as a threat from a mother protecting her son. She understood it differently now. Valentina had not come to the house to support Roman. She'd come because she had her own stake in the structure, her own assets inside the network, her own exposure to protect. And the framework her attorneys had prepared was not something Roman had commissioned unilaterally. It had been a family project. His mother knew, Naomi said. Bianca nodded. From what I can piece together, yes. The holding company structure that routes through your business. The way the vendor payments are categorized, Valentina's personal financial manager is in those email chains. Not directly. But the account that receives the confirmation receipts is connected to an entity I traced back to a property she owns in Naples. Naples, Italy. Yes, Naomi sat back. She had spent 10 years believing that Valentina Vescari regarded her as an acceptable intrusion into the family tolerated, occasionally warmed to, but never fully inside the circle. She understood now that Valentina had regarded her as something more specific than an outsider. She had regarded her as a useful instrument. "Can you forward me these screenshots?" Naomi asked. "I've already sent them to a secure email address." "I'll give you the credentials." Bianca paused. "What are you going to do?" "What are you going to do?" Naomi asked back. Bianca looked at the untouched coffee. "I know I'm not going to give the account Roman wants me to give. I know that. But beyond that," she shook her head. "I've been trying to figure out when I stopped seeing clearly. When I started just doing what he said, without asking what it was for. Does it matter when?" Bianca looked up. "You're asking that as though the answer changes the situation you're in," Naomi said. "It wasn't cruel. It was just exact. It doesn't. What matters now is what you do from here." "I know." They sat for a moment. "He's going to know I called you," Bianca said. He monitors my phone remotely. I didn't realize it. Until last week, I found when I was looking through my settings. By now, he probably knows we met. Naomi processed that information without showing what it did to her. Then we don't have as much time as I thought, she said. She left the coffee shop and called Patricia from the car. She gave her the overview in fast, clean sentences, the way she'd learned to brief clients. When a venue fell through 2 hours, before an event, no panic, no excess, just the essential information in the order it needed to be addressed. Patricia listened without interrupting. Send me the secure credentials for the screenshots the moment you're off the phone, she said. And Naomi, go home. Be there when Roman gets back. Be normal. Whatever normal looks like for you right now. He knows I met with Bianca, probably, which means you need to be somewhere he can see you before he decides what to do about it. She drove home. Roman's car was in the driveway. She went inside and found him in the kitchen, which was where they had always had their most significant conversations, not by design, just by the geography of their lives, the room they both gravitated toward in moments that required presence. He was standing at the island again. No coffee this time. Just standing, with his phone face up on the counter and his hands at his sides. He looked at her when she came in. You met with Bianca, he said. I did, she called you. Yes. He nodded slowly. The managing expression was gone. What was on his face now was something she didn't have a clean category for, not anger, not the manufactured calm of their previous conversations. Something rawer, the look of a man who has been running a very complex operation for a very long time and has just watched one of the critical components shift position. She's scared, Naomi said. She figured out what you were building. Bianca is making decisions she doesn't fully understand the consequences of. Like I was? He looked at her. Like I was, she said again. Flat, certain, not a question anymore. That's what you were counting on. That I didn't understand the consequences. It's because you'd made sure I didn't have enough information to understand them. Naomi, Valentina's financial manager, is in the email chains, Roman. She watched his jaw tighten, watched the shift in his eyes that told her the information landed exactly where she'd aimed it. I know about Naples. I know the framework her attorneys prepared wasn't just about protecting you. It was about protecting assets she has inside the same structure. This wasn't your plan for your exposure. This was a family plan for family exposure, and the person assigned to absorb it was me. Kitchen was very quiet. You need to stop, he said. His voice had dropped to a register she'd only heard a handful of times in 10 years, not loud, not aggressive, but carrying the specific weight of a man who was accustomed to this particular tone-ending conversations. You need to stop right now and think about what you're doing. There are people connected to this structure who are not me, who are not my mother, and who do not have any patience for loose ends. I have been protecting you from that reality for 10 years. I have been managing the distance between what my world actually is and where you stand in it. If you take this further, I cannot maintain that distance. Are you telling me I'm in danger? I'm telling you that I have kept you out of danger for 10 years, and I need you to let me keep doing that. By letting you blame me for the accounts. By being quiet. He moved toward her, not aggressively but close. Give me the records. Give me the phone. Let me manage this the way I've managed everything else. And when it's done, I will take care of you and the baby in a way that makes everything you've found out irrelevant. You will not want for anything. She looked at him for a long moment. She thought about standing in front of that mirror in the blue Milan dress, adjusting the fabric because she was 8 months pregnant and still wanted to look good for him. She thought about the watch on the nightstand with its 4 engraved words. She thought about the version of herself that had existed 48 hours ago and how completely that version had been built on information she didn't have. No, she said. Naomi. No, she stepped back. I'm not going to be quiet. I'm not going to give you anything. And I'm not going to let you characterize me as emotionally unstable to a federal investigator while I'm standing here having the clearest conversation I've had in 10 years. Something broke in his face then, not dramatically, just a small fracture in the surface. If you go forward with this, I cannot protect you from what comes next. Then don't, she said. I'll manage it myself. She went upstairs. She sat on the edge of the guest bed and pressed her hands together between her knees and breathed, not the controlled midwife breathing, just the raw kind, the kind that shook slightly on the way out. She let it shake. She had earned the shaking. Then she picked up her phone. She opened the email from the secure account Bianca had sent her. She downloaded every screenshot. She forwarded everything to Patricia. Then she opened a separate email and composed a message to a federal financial line that Patricia had provided her during that morning's meeting. Attaching a summary document, Patricia's paralegal had helped her draft not the full records, not yet, just enough to establish that a concern existed and that a named attorney was prepared to cooperate on behalf of a client. She sent it. She set the phone down. She understood, sitting on the edge of that bed, that there was no version of the next weeks or months that was going to be comfortable. There was no path that didn't run through difficult and then through worse before it reached something livable on the other side. The woman she'd been 48 hours ago might have been persuaded by the right combination of fear and affection to find a quieter exit. That woman was gone. She wasn't sure exactly when. Maybe in the parking garage when she'd used the word evidence, before she knew why. Maybe in the kitchen when she'd watched Roman's face pull through calculations instead of remorse. Maybe in Patricia's office that morning, reading Bianca's screenshots and finally understanding the scale of what had been built around her. What she knew was that she was the person who was left, and that person was not going back. She was sitting there, hand on her stomach, when the text came from Tessa. She looked at it, read it once, then read it again. Cora Sutton's LinkedIn just went private. Her work history at Sterling Events has been removed. Someone just scrubbed her. Naomi stared at the text. Then she called Patricia. "They're cleaning up," she said, the moment Patricia answered. "Tell me Cora Sutton, my operations manager, the one I think Roman planted her professional profile, just went dark." Someone removed her employment history. "That's fast," Patricia said, and there was something in her voice that was not quite alarm, but was its neighbor. "Naomi, I need you to listen to me very carefully. The tip I helped you submit this morning, depending on how quickly it gets reviewed, we may be working on a much shorter timeline than I originally projected. If Roman's people are already sanitizing peripheral records, it means someone on his side is moving. What do I need to do? Right now? Don't leave the house tonight. Don't get into a car with anyone connected to Roman or Valentina without telling me first. And I need you to text me one word every hour on the hour until 9 p.m., so I know you're fine. Just one word. Any word, Patricia, every hour. Starting now." The line went quiet. Naomi set the phone on the nightstand beside the engraved watch. She looked at the watch for a moment. She reached out and turned it face down. Then the door at the bottom of the stairs opened, and she heard Roman's footsteps on the stairs, and they were not the slow, considering footsteps of the previous night. They were fast, purposeful, the footsteps of a man who had just received information that had changed his calculations. He knocked once and opened the door. He was holding his phone. He looked at her with an expression that had shed every remaining layer of management and control and was left with something underneath that she was seeing clearly for the first time. It was not anger. It was not grief. It was the look of a man who has just realized he has run out of moves with the person in front of him and is trying to determine, in real time, what that means. "You filed a tip," he said. She said nothing. "With the Financial Crimes Division." He held up the phone. Somewhere in his network, someone had access she hadn't accounted for. "You filed a tip this morning through Patricia Hale's office." Naomi held his gaze. "What you just did," Roman said quietly, "cannot be undone." "I know," she said. "People are going to come at you. People who have nothing to do with me and don't care about our marriage or your pregnancy or what's right. They will come at you because you just made yourself a piece of something much larger than you understand, and they will not be Roman." Her voice was very quiet. "I am 8 months pregnant, and I have been sitting in this house for 2 days understanding that you spent 14 months building a structure to send me to prison if your empire ever fell. So please do not tell me about the danger of the situation you put me in." He stood in the doorway for a long moment. Then he said something she did not expect. "I'm sorry." Not the managed apology of the first night. Not the strategic admission of a man repositioning. Something thinner. Something that sounded, against everything, like it might have been real. "I know," she said. "It doesn't change anything." He left. She sat alone in the guest room, listening to the sounds of the house, the settlement of walls, the distant street, the small movements of a man somewhere below her, who was trying to figure out how the person he had controlled for a decade had become the most significant variable in his survival. And she breathed, and she thought, and she did not cry. She was 8 months pregnant, alone in a guest room, having just sent the first shot into the infrastructure of her husband's empire. She was terrified. She was clear. She texted Patricia one word, exactly on the hour. Standing. Then she sat in the dark and waited for whatever was coming next. And she made herself a promise, quiet, specific, entirely private, that whatever shape the next version of her life took, no one was ever again going to build a room around her without her knowing. She texted Patricia every hour until 9 p.m. At 9:01, Patricia texted back, "Good. Your bedroom door tonight." I mean that literally. Naomi locked it. She didn't sleep. She lay on top of the covers in her clothes and listened to the house and tracked every sound Roman's footsteps at 11. Then again at 1 in the morning, the particular pattern of a man who was not sleeping either, who was pacing the geography of a problem that had no clean exit. Twice she heard him on the phone, his voice low and continuous, through the floor below her, the words indistinct, but the tone unmistakable. Crisis management, the voice he used when something in his world required immediate structural repair. She was the structural problem now. At 3:17 in the morning, the baby kicked so hard it took her breath away. She pressed both palms against her stomach and breathed through it, and when the movement settled, she stayed like that for a long time, hands flat, feeling the small insistent life inside her, doing whatever it was doing in there, completely unaware that the world it was about to be born into was currently being dismantled from the outside in. "I know," she said. Same words as before. She was running out of other things to say to the baby, but that one seemed to cover most situations. At 6 a.m. she got up, washed her face, changed clothes, and went downstairs. Roman was at the island.
He looked like the night had cost him something.
There were shadows under his eyes that she didn't think she'd ever seen before. Not because he'd never lost sleep, but because Roman was the kind of man who presented himself as someone for whom sleeplessness left no mark. The marks were there now. The surface had cracked enough to show them. He looked at her when she came in. Neither of them said anything for a moment. Then his phone buzzed on the counter, and he looked at it, and something shifted in his face, a rapid, decisive movement, like a door closing, and he picked it up and walked out of the kitchen, without a word. She made coffee she didn't particularly want, and stood at the counter drinking it, and thought about what Patricia had said, "Don't get into a car with anyone connected to Roman or Valentina without telling me first." The specificity of that warning had been sitting with her since last night. Patricia Hale was a precise woman. She didn't include details that weren't load-bearing. At 7:15, Naomi's phone rang. Unknown number. "Chicago area code," she answered. "Mrs. Vescari." A man's voice. Measured, professional, carrying the particular flatness of someone accustomed to delivering information without editorial. "My name is Special Agent David Mercer. I'm with the Financial Crimes Enforcement Division. We received a referral from your attorney Patricia Hale, and I'd like to arrange a time to speak with you at your earliest convenience." She set her coffee cup down carefully. "How early?" she asked. "Today, if possible. We could come to your attorney's office, if that's more comfortable than another location." 10 o'clock, she said. "Patricia Hale's office. I'll confirm with her, and she'll reach out to you." "Thank you, Mrs. Vescari. And one thing, if possible, mention that I'm not calling it to anyone in your household before we meet." "I understand," she said. She called Patricia before she'd fully ended the call with Mercer. Patricia answered on the first ring, which told Naomi she'd already heard. "Mercer's good," Patricia said immediately. "I know his work. He's not someone who calls without already having a significant amount of what he needs." The referral wasn't the start of their investigation, Naomi. It was confirmation of something they were already building. "How long have they been building it?" "I don't know yet. But the fact that he called you this quickly tells me the tip landed on active ground." A pause. "You need to leave for my office without Roman knowing where you're going. Can you do that?" She looked at the kitchen doorway. She could hear Roman's voice, somewhere in the house, still on the phone. The low, continuous murmur of a man managing a crisis from multiple angles simultaneously. "Yes," she said. 45 minutes. She went upstairs and retrieved the folder from behind the winter coats. She put it in her bag with the methodical calm of someone doing something they've rehearsed in their mind enough times that the physical execution feels almost administrative. Then she went back downstairs, picked up her car keys from the bowl by the door, and walked out. She was 3 steps from the car when Roman appeared in the doorway. "Where are you going?" Not casual, direct. "Doctor's appointment." She said it without breaking stride. 8 months pregnant, it was a reasonable alibi at any hour. He stood in the doorway and watched her get in the car. She drove 2 blocks before she exhaled. Patricia's office had a different quality at 10 in the morning, with a federal agent in the room. Special Agent Mercer was younger than his voice suggested, early 40s, dark suit, the particular kind of stillness that came from years of watching people decide how much to say and timing his own words around those decisions. He had a colleague with him, a woman introduced as Agent Flores, who took notes with an efficiency that felt almost invisible. Naomi sat beside Patricia and answered every question. She had been preparing for this conversation in some form. Since the night she watched the video 37 seconds of her life, she could not unwatch. She was prepared. She was clear. She laid out what she knew in the order she knew it: the documents, the forged signatures, the vendor payments, Cora Sutton's role, Bianca's messages, the email chains connecting Valentina's financial manager to the account confirmation receipts. Mercer listened with the focused attention of a man who was not hearing most of this for the first time, but who was hearing it assembled in this particular shape for the first time and finding the shape useful. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. "The message referencing your husband's mother's attorneys having prepared a framework," he said. "The one Bianca Moretti forwarded. Is she prepared to cooperate formally?" "I believe so. You'd need to speak with her directly." "We will." He looked at the folder Patricia had placed on the table. "Mrs. Vescari, I want to be clear with you about something. The financial activity we've been examining in connection with your husband's enterprises has been under review for considerably longer than the last few days. What your records add is a dimension we were aware existed, but hadn't fully mapped. The use of your company as a routing mechanism, the forged signatures. The vendor structures this matters significantly, not because it changes the core of what we've built, because it closes the question of how certain payments were obscured. It closes the question," she said slowly, "meaning my company was the answer to a question you already had. Yes, and the answer was put there by my husband, not by me. The documentation supports that, combined with what Miss Moretti can provide." "Yes," she breathed. "Am I?" She stopped, restarted. "What is my exposure here?" Mercer and Patricia exchanged a look that was brief and carried a sentence's worth of information between them. "Based on what we have," Mercer said carefully, "and what you've provided, our current assessment is that your involvement was constructed around you, not by you. You appear in these records as a vehicle, not a participant." He paused. "That assessment can change if information surfaces that contradicts what you've told us today. It won't change if you continue to cooperate fully and transparently." "I intend to," she said. "Good." He stood, which was the signal that the formal part of the conversation was over. "We'll be in touch through Miss Hale. One more thing, your husband is likely going to know this meeting happened, if he doesn't already. We'd encourage you to think carefully about your immediate living situation." She drove home in the specific days that follows the conclusion of something that has required your entire self to get through, not the pleasant days of relief, but the depleted clarity of a person who has expended everything they had and is now running on whatever comes after reserves. She pulled into the driveway. There were 2 cars in front of the house that hadn't been there this morning. One she didn't recognize. The other belonged to Leonard Ferris. She sat in her car for 30 seconds. She texted Patricia, "Ferris is at my house. Unknown second vehicle." Patricia's response came in under a minute. "Don't go in alone. Call me from inside the car," she called. She kept the engine running. "If Ferris is there with Roman right now," Patricia said, "they know or strongly suspect about the meeting this morning. Do not go into that house without telling me you've decided to. And if you go in, do not sign anything. I don't care what they put in front of you. A settlement offer, a separation agreement, a document that looks completely routine. Nothing. I understand. Do you want to go in?" Naomi looked at the front door of the house she'd lived in for 7 years. She thought about Mercer's quiet, specific voice. She thought about the folder in her bag. She thought about being 8 months pregnant and having approximately one significant asset left in this situation, which was that Roman still believed, or was behaving, as though he believed that she could be brought back inside the manageable perimeter. If she stayed in the car, she told him she knew she couldn't be. If she went in, she maintained the ambiguity for one more round. "I'm going in," she said. "Naomi, I'll call you in an hour." She hung up before Patricia could argue. She walked into her house. Roman was in the front room with Leonard Ferris, and a third person she didn't recognize, a woman, 50 or so, in a tailored jacket, with the particular groomed alertness of a very expensive consultant. They all looked at Naomi when she came in, with the coordinated attention of people who had been expecting her arrival and had arranged themselves accordingly. "Sit down, Naomi," Roman said. "Tell me who she is first." She nodded toward the unknown woman. "My name is Karen Voss," the woman said. "I'm a crisis management consultant. Roman asked me to facilitate this conversation." Naomi looked at Roman. "You hired a crisis manager." "I hired someone to help us communicate," he said. "Given where things are." "Where things are," she repeated. She sat down, not because he'd told her to, because she wanted to see what they had. Karen Voss opened a slim folder of her own. "Naomi, I want to be direct with you about the purpose of this meeting. Roman and his legal team are prepared to offer you a comprehensive separation agreement, full ownership of your company, clear of any encumbrance from his business interests, the marital home held in your name outright, a financial settlement that will support you and the baby comfortably for the foreseeable future, medical coverage through delivery and for 2 years following." Naomi listened. "In exchange," Karen continued, "Roman is asking for the return of all physical copies of the documents you've compiled, deletion of digital records you've gathered, outside your company's normal operations, and a confidentiality agreement covering the specific details of his business arrangements." The room waited. Naomi looked at Roman. He was watching her with the focused, unreadable attention of a man making his last credible offer and knowing it. "You're asking me to disappear," she said. "I'm asking you to be taken care of," he said, "while you find another way to manage the exposure. While I manage a situation that is significantly more complicated than you understand." "I met with Agent Mercer this morning." She said it cleanly. No drama, just information delivered at the right moment. The room changed, not loudly. The way a room changes when someone opens a window in cold weather, a sudden, total shift in the quality of the air. Leonard Ferris stopped moving his pen. Karen Voss's expression underwent a rapid internal adjustment she almost managed to hide. Roman went very still. "You filed a tip," he said slowly, "and then you met with a federal agent." "Yes, this morning. Before you came back here." "Yes." The silence was long. Roman stood up. He walked to the window, the same window he'd stood at 2 days ago, when all of this was still in its first hours. He put one hand on the frame and looked out at the street, and Naomi watched his back and the particular quality of tension in his shoulders, and understood she was watching a man recalibrate in real time. "Get out," he said, not to her, to Leonard Ferris and Karen Voss. Ferris started to speak. "Get out." They left. The front door closed. Roman stood at the window. Naomi sat in the chair. The house was quiet except for the sound of the street outside and the distant hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen and the specific, loaded silence of two people who have just crossed into territory from which there is no civil retreat. "What did you give him?" Roman asked, still facing the window. "Everything I found. The vendor records." "Yes." "The account documentation." "Yes." "Bianca's messages." He turned around. His face was, she didn't have a word for it that didn't feel insufficient. It wasn't anger. Anger would have been easier. It was something that had anger inside it, struck around something else, something that she recognized only because she'd spent 10 years learning the grammar of this man's emotional life. It was the look of someone confronting a loss he hadn't believed was possible. "You understand what you've started," he said. "I understand what you built and what I had to do about it. People are going to get hurt by this. Not just me. Not just my mother. People who have nothing to do with you and never did anything to you personally. I didn't build the structure, Roman. That's not the same as not being responsible for what pulling it apart does to everyone inside it." She stood up. Her back had been aching since morning, and standing felt marginally better than sitting. She faced him from across the room, 8 months pregnant, with the folder still in her bag and the knowledge of everything she'd set in motion sitting behind her eyes. "You want me to feel responsible for the consequences of your choices," she said. "You've been doing that for 10 years, framing your decisions as things I needed to protect. Your world, your enemies, your empire. Always something I was supposed to absorb the risk of on your behalf. I'm not doing it anymore. Naomi, you put my name on those accounts. My signature on those documents. You were going to let me take it. While I was pregnant." Her voice was controlled. She worked to keep it that way. "Tell me one thing, one honest thing. If the investigation had come before you were caught, before I knew any of this, would you have let them come for me?" He didn't answer. "Tell me," she said. "It wouldn't have come to that." "That's not an answer. It wouldn't have, Roman." She looked at him hard. Would you have let them come for me? The silence has lasted 6 seconds. She counted. I would have managed it, he said. That's not a no. He looked away. That was the moment, not the anniversary night, not the 4 hours going through the financial records, not even the meeting with Mercer that morning. This was the moment she felt something genuinely break, not in herself, but in the last remaining architecture of her belief in the marriage. The affair had shattered something. This destroyed what remained, not with noise, just with the absence of a denial, when a denial was the only thing that could have meant anything. He would have managed it. He would have let them build a case around her name and her company and the forged echo of her signature, and he would have managed it, meaning he would have stayed at arm's length and directed the narrative from safety while she stood in front of investigators trying to explain documents she'd never signed. She picked up her bag. I'm going to Tessa's, she said. Tonight and until I have a legal framework that separates my personal and business assets from everything connected to your enterprises. My attorney will contact yours. You can't. He stopped. Naomi, this house is your home. You turned my home into a financial crime, she said. I'll find another one. She walked toward the door. There are people. His voice cracked slightly on the second word, which she'd never heard from him, not once in 10 years. There are people who are going to see you as a threat now, not because of what you've done, because of what you might do, because of what Mercer's office does with what you've given them. I need you to be somewhere safe. She stopped at the door. She turned around and looked at him, across the length of the front room, and she thought, in a way that surprised her with its specificity, I still know this person. I know the color his voice gets when he's afraid. I know the way his hands move when he's trying not to show what he's feeling. I know everything about him except the thing that mattered most, which was the thing I was choosing not to look at. Then help my attorney make the legal separation fast, she said. That's the only protection you can give me now. She left. She drove to Tessa's apartment with both hands on the wheel and the radio still off, and the specific, enormous quiet of a person who has just ended something that was the central structure of their life and is now existing in the moment immediately after, before the next structure has had time to form. Tessa met her at the door, took one look at her face, and stepped aside without a word. Naomi sat on Tessa's couch and told her everything about the morning in the flat, detailed voice of someone reading from a document they'd memorized. Tessa listened without interrupting. When Naomi finished, Tessa went to the kitchen and came back with water and crackers practical, unflashy, exactly right, and sat beside her and said nothing for a moment. What do you need right now? Tessa asked. I need to know that the copies you have are somewhere Roman can't get to. They're in a safety deposit box at a branch he's never been to. I went this morning. Okay. Naomi let out a breath. What else? I think I need to sleep. Actually sleep. For the first time in 3 days. The guest room is yours. She slept for 4 hours. She woke at 4:17 in the afternoon to 3 missed calls from Patricia and a text that read, "Call me the moment you see this." She called. Roman's legal team filed an emergency motion this afternoon, Patricia said, without preamble. They're seeking an injunction that would freeze access to Sterling Events accounts on the basis that the business is currently under federal scrutiny and that asset movement could constitute evidence tampering. Naomi sat up. They're using the investigation they were trying to avoid to freeze my company. Yes, it's a pressure move. If they can freeze your accounts, they cut off your operational capacity and your ability to fund continued legal action. They're not trying to win the motion, they're trying to buy time and squeeze your resources. Can they get it? Not easily, but we need to move fast. I need you in my office tomorrow morning at 8 with every document that establishes your company's financial independence from Roman's enterprises. Every vendor contract, every client account, every tax return going back to your founding. A pause. I also need you to be prepared for something. What? The injunction filing is public record. Reporters are going to start calling. Possibly tonight. Do not speak to any of them. I won't. Naomi, Patricia's voice shifted to a register that was still professional, but carried something underneath it that was closer to personal. You're doing the right thing. I want you to know that I've been doing this for 30 years, and what you've done in the last 72 hours, the clarity of it, the documentation, the decision-making, it's not ordinary. I've worked with people in far better circumstances who fell apart completely. You haven't. Naomi looked at Tessa's guest room ceiling. I've been falling apart the whole time, she said. I've just been doing it in the guest room at 2 in the morning. That counts, Patricia said. Get the documents ready. She spent the evening at Tessa's kitchen table going through digital files. Tessa helped her pull from the Sterling Events server remotely the company's operational accounts, the client history, the tax documentation. She built a picture, document by document, of a business that had existed as a legitimate enterprise for 5 years and had been used as a financial instrument without its owner's knowledge or consent. At 9 p.m., Tessa made pasta, and they ate at the kitchen table without talking much, the comfortable silence of two people who have been friends long enough to know that not everything needs to be processed out loud. At 10:15, Roman called. She let it go to voicemail. The message was 40 seconds long. She played it with the phone held close to her ear so Tessa couldn't hear, standing in the hallway outside the guest room. His voice was different than she'd ever heard it. Not broken. Roman did not break in the ways that most people did, but stripped, like a voice from which some layer of construction had been removed, leaving something underneath that was rawer and smaller and more recognizable as human. I know what you're preparing for tomorrow. I'm not going to fight it. I'm asking you a pause. The first time she'd heard him pause inside a sentence in 10 years. I'm asking you to understand that whatever I built, whatever I did, there was a version of it that was real. There was a version of me, and you in this, that was real. I need you to know that before everything else starts, because after tomorrow it's going to be very loud, and I don't know when we'll be able to talk without all of it. So, that's what I needed to say. She stood in the hallway for a moment after the message ended. Then she put the phone in her pocket and went back to the kitchen table and the work of building the legal framework that would protect company and her child, that would protect Tari and her child and the life she was going to have to construct from scratch, and she did not call him back. At 11:45, a text came from a number she didn't have saved. She almost didn't open it. She opened it. This is Valentina. I know you won't believe me, but what is coming tomorrow is going to be worse than you expect. Roman doesn't know I'm sending this. There are people in the structure who are not going to accept what you've done quietly. I am asking you not for Roman, not for the family, to be careful where you go in the next 24 hours. Please. Naomi read the message 3 times. Valentina Vescari, who had stood in her front room with a leather portfolio attorney and told her to think carefully, was now texting from a private number at midnight to tell her to be careful. She forwarded the text to Patricia immediately. Then she sat on the edge of the guest bed with the phone in both hands and felt, for the first time since this had started, the specific cold of genuine physical fear. Not fear of losing the house or the marriage or the legal battle. Fear of something more immediate and less abstract. She called Patricia. I got it, Patricia said before Naomi could speak. She'd already seen the forwarded message. I'm calling Mercer tonight, regardless of the hour. Do you think she's serious? I think Valentina Vescari does not send messages like that without a reason. And I think the reason is that she knows something she hasn't told Roman, and that something frightens her more than the investigation does. Patricia's voice was very controlled. I need you to stay where you are tonight. Tessa's building, does it have a doorman? Yes. Don't leave without him knowing. Don't let anyone up who isn't Tessa or me. I'm going to have someone outside the building tonight. Patricia, this is what careful looks like from here on out. A pause. Try to sleep. You have 8 o'clock tomorrow, and it's going to be a long day. She lay on the guest bed in the dark and listened to Tessa's apartment breathe around her, the refrigerator hum, the distant street, the small sounds of a building full of people living ordinary nights, and she thought about Valentina's message, and what it meant that the woman who had helped build the structure, designed to sacrifice Naomi, was now warning her from the outside. It meant the structure was coming apart faster than anyone had planned. It meant there were people inside it who were not going to manage that collapse quietly. It meant that the tip she'd filed, the documents she'd given Mercer, the injunction she was going to fight in the morning, all of it had set something moving that was larger than her marriage, larger than Roman's empire, larger than any single person's careful management could contain. She was the reason it was moving. She was the thing standing in the open now, with nowhere to step back to, with everything she had forwarded to the right people and documented and secured and put beyond Roman's reach. And the people who were not going to be quiet about what she'd done did not know yet that she had anticipated them, had planned for them, had spent 3 days building a paper architecture so complete that destroying her would not destroy the evidence. The baby moved. I know, she said. She put her hand on her stomach in the dark. Tomorrow was going to be loud. She was ready for loud. What she was not ready for what she could feel, coming in the specific, sourceless way that you feel weather before the sky changes, was the thing she didn't know yet. The dimension of this she hadn't found. The variable she hadn't accounted for, sitting somewhere in the dark outside Tessa's building, patient in the way that dangerous things are always patient, waiting for the moment when Naomi Sterling Vescari believed she had finally seen the... She didn't sleep past 3 a.m. The feeling she'd gone to bed with, that sourceless weather before the storm, feeling of something she hadn't accounted for, sitting in the dark somewhere outside the range of what she could see, hadn't left. It had just quieted enough to let her rest for a few hours, and then resumed at full volume the moment her eyes opened, urgent and specific, in a way that feelings in the night rarely are. She lay still for a moment, listening to the apartment. Tessa's building had a particular nighttime quiet different from the house on the north side, less settled. More the anonymous quiet of a place where many separate lives ran parallel to each other without touching. She'd always found it slightly impersonal. Tonight it felt like safety. She picked up her phone. 2:58 a.m. Nothing from Patricia. Nothing from Roman. One text from an unknown number, sent at 2:11 that read only, "You should know what your husband traded to keep you out of it originally. Ask him about Marcus Hale. Ask him what Marcus Hale cost." She read it 4 times, Marcus Hale. She didn't know the name. She sat up in the dark and turned it over, looking for a connection, a vendor, a client, a name she'd heard in passing at one of Roman's events. Nothing arrived. The name sat in her mind like a locked door with no obvious keyhole. She forwarded the text to Patricia with a single line beneath it. "Do you know this name?" Then she got up, because lying in the dark with that text and no answer was not something she was capable of doing until morning. She made tea in Tessa's kitchen, standing at the counter in the dark, because turning on the overhead light felt like too much of a commitment to being awake. She stood there with her hands around the warm mug and the city's 3 a.m. ambient glow coming through the kitchen window, and she thought about the shape of the last 4 days. 4 days, 96 hours from the parking lot to here. It felt like a geological event, like something that should have taken years had instead been compressed into a time frame so short that the pressure of it had changed the molecular structure of everything inside it. She was not the same person who had driven to that hotel with a wrapped watch and a blue dress and a decade of belief intact. She wasn't sure yet what person she was instead. Her phone lit up on the counter. "Patricia, can't sleep either. Marcus Hale, give me an hour. Don't respond to the unknown number." She drank her tea. She watched the window. At 4:15, Patricia called. "Marcus Hale," Patricia said, without greeting. Her voice had the particular texture of someone who had been on their computer for an hour in the middle of the night and had found something they wished they hadn't. 43 years old, real estate developer. His company, Hale Property Group, went into receivership 8 months ago, following the collapse of a financing structure that was traced back to a series of fraudulent property valuations. She paused. Marcus Hale died 6 months ago, officially cardiac event. He was in good health. He was 43. Naomi put her mug down. "He was connected to Roman," she said. "He was the person Roman used as the primary intermediary for the document transfers. The ones I think were caught on the edge of your anniversary video. Hale moved the documentation between the offshore holding structures and the legitimate property entities. He was, from what I can piece together at 4 in the morning, the person who knew where every body was buried." Another pause. "He died 6 months ago. 2 months after the financing structure collapsed," Naomi said. "Yes. Roman kept me out of the investigation originally," Naomi said slowly. "The text says he traded something to do that. If Hale was the intermediary, if Hale knew everything, then keeping you insulated may have cost Roman something significant. A concession to whoever sits above him in the structure. A demonstration of good faith that involved giving something up." Patricia's voice was very careful. "I don't know what that was, but the person who sent you that text knows. And they sent it to you, specifically, at 3 in the morning, which means they want you to ask Roman about it before tomorrow's hearing. Why would they want that? Because a conversation in which Roman explains what he traded might produce information useful to someone else in the structure. Someone who is currently more afraid of the investigation than Roman is. Someone who might benefit from Roman being destabilized further before the legal proceedings formalize." She let that sit for a moment. "Or," she said, "it might be someone who genuinely thinks you deserve to know. Which do you think it is?" I think you shouldn't talk to Roman about Marcus Hale after we've spoken with Mercer this morning. And I think you should know that what happened to Marcus Hale is a reason to take Valentina's midnight text very seriously. She paused. My person outside Tessa's building checked in 20 minutes ago. All quiet. But Naomi don't go anywhere alone today. She didn't. Tessa drove her to Patricia's office at 7:30. They rode in the specific silence of two women who understand each other well enough to know when conversation is not what the other person needs. Tessa kept both hands on the wheel and her eyes on the road, and Naomi watched Chicago move past the window in its early morning form delivery trucks, and joggers and coffee shop awnings being cranked open, city doing its ordinary business, in complete indifference to the fact that her life was being decided in increments inside it. The meeting with Agent Mercer lasted 3 hours. He brought 2 colleagues this time. The room had a different density to it, not threatening, but weighted. The way a room feels when the people in it are very close to the edge of something significant and know it. Mercer had clearly not slept much either. He had the focused, slightly hollowed look of someone running on purpose rather than rest. He asked about Marcus Hale within the first 15 minutes. You know about him, Naomi said. We've known about him for some time. Mercer's voice was even. What I'd like to know is whether Roman ever mentioned him to you, in any context, directly or obliquely. No, I received his name last night from an unknown number. I forwarded it to Patricia. Mercer looked at Patricia, who slid her phone across the table with the text pulled up. He read it. He showed it to the colleague on his left, without comment. Marcus Hale was the structural linchpin of the document transfer system, Mercer said, looking back at Naomi. His death created significant pressure on the people above him in the chain, because he was the person who understood the full architecture. Without him, certain components of the structure became legible in ways they hadn't been when he was managing them. He folded his hands. We believe his death was not accidental. The room was very still. And you believe Roman, she started. I believe Roman Vescari is significantly afraid of the people above him in the organizational structure. I believe that fear has been a primary factor in the decisions he's made over the last several years, including the decision to route financial activity through your company. Giving investigators a local legible target meant the investigation stayed at the level of Roman's operations, rather than ascending to the level above him. He looked at her steadily. Your husband wasn't only protecting himself by building what he built around your company. He was protecting someone else's interests too, someone whose patience is considerably more limited than Roman's. Naomi thought about Valentina's midnight text. There are people in the structure who are not going to accept what you've done quietly. Not Roman's people. Not Valentina's family circle. Someone above. The person Valentina was warning me about, she said. We believe so, yes. What does that mean for me right now? Concretely. Mercer considered his words. It means that you have made yourself significant. The documentation you've provided, combined with Bianca Moratti's cooperation, which was formalized this morning. She came in at 6 a.m. with her own attorney, creates a body of evidence that is considerably more difficult to suppress or discredit than a single source. The people above Roman in the structure know this. They will calculate accordingly. He paused. We have had assets positioned around your location since 11 p.m. last night, following the text from Valentina Vescari. You are not unwatched. She felt the information land somewhere deep, in the part of her that had been carrying the three and fear since she woke. Thank you, she said. Thank you, he said. What you've provided changes the scope of this significantly. The injunction hearing was at 2 p.m. Leonard Ferris appeared with 2 additional attorneys, which told Naomi the filing had been more serious than a pressure move, or that Roman was treating it as more serious, which amounted to the same thing. Patricia stood beside her with the particular stillness of a woman who had been in many courtrooms and found the architecture of all of them essentially identical, regardless of what happened inside them. The judge was a practical woman in her 60s who read the injunction filing, read Patricia's response, and asked 3 questions in the flat, direct manner of someone who makes decisions for a living and has no patience for theater. The 3rd question was directed at Leonard Ferris. Can you demonstrate that the respondent had knowledge of and participated in the financial activity that forms the basis for this injunction? Ferris spoke for 4 minutes. He was good, but the documentation Patricia had compiled was better. And when the judge set the papers down and removed her glasses and looked at the room, Naomi knew before she spoke. The injunction was denied. She didn't feel triumph. She felt something closer to exhaustion, with a floor underneath it, the specific relief of a person who has been holding a structure in place with their hands for a long time and has just been told they can put it down. Outside the courtroom, Patricia squeezed her arm once. Brief and professional. That's one, she said. How many more? Several. But that was the one that mattered most today. Roman was not at the hearing. His attorneys had represented him. Naomi thought, walking down the courthouse steps beside Tessa and Patricia into the cold afternoon, that this was the clearest signal yet of how the next phase was going to look, conducted through intermediaries, through legal filings and formal channels, the actual human beings at the center of it, increasingly distant from each other. She and Roman would probably not be in the same room again for a significant period of time. She wasn't sure how she felt about that. She found out 6 days later. Patricia had negotiated a supervised meeting, both attorneys present, neutral location, strictly time limited. The purpose formally was to discuss the terms of a legal separation agreement that had been drafted and counter-drafted 3 times in the preceding week. The purpose, in the way that legal purposes rarely capture, was that Naomi had something she needed to say, directly to Roman Vescari, and she had decided that saying it mattered. They met in a conference room in a building on the river. Gray afternoon, the water below the windows moving in its slow, muscular way. Roman arrived before her. He was sitting at the table when she came in, and he stood when she entered, which was a reflex of his that she'd always found quietly old-fashioned, in a way she'd liked. And the sight of it now was complicated in the specific way that all the small things about him were complicated. He looked diminished, not physically, still the same large, carefully dressed man she'd spent 10 years married to. There was a quality he'd carried for, as long as she'd known him, a gravitational density, the sense that his presence took up more space than his body occupied. That quality was significantly reduced. He looked like a man whose empire was in the process of being systematically dismantled around him, which was because he was. Federal charges had been formally filed 48 hours earlier. Valentina's assets were frozen pending investigation. Bianca had given a formal statement that had closed certain gaps in the financial record, in ways that Roman's attorneys were still calculating the impact of. Cora Sutton had been located in Phoenix, had lawyered up immediately, and was reportedly in conversations with investigators that Roman's team was very unhappy about. The empire was not collapsing dramatically. It was collapsing the way expensive things do in stages, each one careful and irreversible, each one making the next one more inevitable. Roman stood until she sat down. Then he sat. The attorneys were at the far end of the table, technically present, practically as invisible as 2 people in a room can be when the other 2 people in it are not paying attention to them. Naomi and Roman looked at each other. For a moment, she just let herself look at him, the way she hadn't allowed herself to since the parking lot. Not with assessment, not with the cataloging attention she'd spent the last week applying to everything connected to him. Just looked. 10 years of a face she knew. The jaw, the hands, the way he held himself when he was uncertain, which was a thing most people never saw because he was uncertain so rarely. "How are you feeling?" he asked. He meant the pregnancy. "I'm fine. The baby's fine." "Good." He looked at the table for a moment, then back at her. "I'm not going to contest the separation agreement. The version Patricia's office sent yesterday. I've instructed Leonard to accept the terms." She hadn't expected that. She kept her face even. All of the terms? Full ownership of Sterling Events, free of any encumbrance. The asset documentation establishing your company's independence from my holdings. The financial settlement. He looked at her steadily. "You'll get what Patricia asked for. Why? Because it's what's right," he said it simply, not performatively. "I know that's not worth much at this point, but it's the honest answer. What's right?" she repeated. "Naomi, you built a financial crime around my name. You were going to let investigators find my signature on documents I never signed. You had some inside my company feeding information back to you for 3 years. Those are facts, Roman. Not the affair. The affair almost feels like the small thing at this point. The facts are what they are." She kept her voice controlled, not cold controlled. "There was a difference. I don't want an apology. I need you to understand that. Nothing you say in this room functions as a thing I need. I came here because I had something to say, and because after 10 years you deserve to hear it directly." He waited. She looked at him across the conference table, with the gray river moving behind him through the windows. "I loved you," she said. I want you to know that I mean that without qualification. Not the version of you I imagined, or the version I needed you to be. The actual version, the difficult, controlled, complicated man who was in my house every morning and could make me feel completely safe in a world I didn't fully understand. I loved that person. I chose him every day for 10 years. She paused. And I think you loved me. In whatever way you're capable of loving something that isn't your empire. I think it was real. I think that's what makes all of it so specifically and exactly terrible. Roman's jaw was tight. He was not going to cry. She knew him well enough to know that was not something that would happen here, not in this room, possibly not anywhere she would ever see. But his eyes had a quality she hadn't seen before, something that lived beneath the control rather than within it. It was real, he said. I know. That's not the same as it being enough. She folded her hands on the table. You asked me. On the night of the anniversary, you asked me to trust you, to manage it. The way you'd always managed it. That was what you were actually asking. To let you keep running the version of events that suited your structure, with me inside it, uninformed and useful. And I spent 10 years saying yes to that because I thought the safety it felt like was the same as the safety it was. Kept you out of it. You kept me ignorant of it. Those aren't the same thing, Roman. He was quiet. Marcus Hale, she said. Something moved in his face. Fast, controlled, but there. You know about Marcus, he said. I know he's dead. I know he was the linchpin of your document transfer structure. I know that when his financing collapse started drawing attention, certain things became legible that hadn't been before. She held his gaze. I know you traded something to keep the investigation from reaching me when it started. I want to know what? A long silence. You don't need to know that, he said. I'm asking anyway. He looked at the river for a moment. When he looked back at her, his voice was lower and flat and carried the specific weight of a man who has kept something for a long time and is making a calculation about whether the keeping still serves any purpose. When the initial federal inquiry started 18 months ago, my name was in proximity to Marcos's structure in a way that created risk. For me and for the people above me, managing that risk required demonstrating that the exposure point was localized, that it didn't extend upward. He stopped. It extended downward instead, she said, to me. It was supposed to be theoretical, a contingency. The investigation was supposed to stay contained. But you needed a contingency that worked. And the contingency required my company to be structured in a specific way. And you needed someone inside my company to maintain that structure. She looked at him steadily. You traded Marcus Hale's cooperation with investigators. You gave him up to keep the inquiry from going upward. And in exchange, the people above you agreed to let the contingency point downward to sterling events instead of to their own structures. The silence confirmed it before he spoke. Yes, he said. Marcus Hale cooperated with investigators because you negotiated him into that position. And then he died. I didn't. He stopped. His hands on the table were still. I did not have anything to do with what happened to Marcus. Do you know who did? He looked at her for a long time. Are you going to give that to Mercer? Another silence. This one different in quality. The silence of a man doing a calculation. How variables were not just legal, but existential. That's a different conversation, he said. One that happens with my own attorneys present. That's a yes, she said. He didn't deny it. She looked at him. She thought about the voicemail he'd left her at Tessa's apartment. The stripped-down voice. The thing that had sounded like the closest to honest she'd heard from him in longer than she could identify. She thought about Valentina's midnight text. She thought about the baby moving in the parking garage while she pressed record, the oldest instinct in the world running underneath everything else. I'm going to build something, she said, with the company. It's already started. I've had 3 inquiries in the last week from clients who heard about the injunction and want to know if Sterling Events is still operational, because apparently the kind of person who can fight a federal-level legal move while 8 months pregnant is exactly the kind of person they want running their events. She almost smiled. Not quite. I'm going to build something that doesn't have your name anywhere near it. That belongs entirely to me and to our child. And I'm going to do it in a way that makes everything you did, the structure, the contingency, all of it completely irrelevant to my life. Not as revenge, just as the only thing that makes sense. Roman looked at her for a long moment. You'll be good at it, he said. And she knew, because she knew him, that he meant it without reservation. It was possibly the most uncomplicated thing he'd said to her in the entirety of their marriage. I know, she said. She stood up. The attorneys at the far end of the table resurfaced, gathering their papers with the subtle efficiency of people, resuming their professional existence after having been temporarily irrelevant. Roman stood too, old reflex. She picked up her bag. She looked at him one final time, not cataloging, not assessing, just looking at the man she had loved for a decade, standing on his side of a table in a room above a river, with his empire in pieces, and his freedom in negotiation, and the specific, irreducible look of someone who has finally arrived at the concept of the choices they made and found them exactly as heavy as they deserved to be. She didn't say goodbye. She didn't think either of them could have managed a word that size without it, meaning either too much or too little, and she was done with things that landed wrong. She walked out. Tessa was in the lobby, standing near the window that faced the river, drinking coffee from a paper cup, with the patient alertness of someone who had been waiting and was good at it. She looked at Naomi's face when she came out of the elevator. "Okay," she asked. "Yes," Naomi said. "Ready. For what?" Naomi thought about it. "Everything after," she said. The baby came on a Tuesday morning in March, 6 weeks after the conference room meeting, 4 weeks after Roman formally accepted the separation agreement, 3 weeks after federal charges were filed against 7 individuals connected to the organizational structure above Roman's enterprises, including 2 men whose names had never appeared in any document Naomi had ever touched. Roman was not in the delivery room. He had asked, through Patricia's office, whether he would be permitted to be present. Naomi had thought about it for 3 days. She had thought about it with the particular honesty that the final weeks of pregnancy imposed the state of being so physically consumed by the immediate that abstraction became impossible, the body demanding full presence in a way that clarified things. She said no, not as punishment, because the person she wanted in that room was Tessa, who had been in Tessa's capacity for the last 5 months, and because she was not yet at the place where Roman's presence would be something other than complicated in a way that didn't serve the moment. She told Patricia to tell him that he would meet the baby, that she was not going to keep his child from him, that there would be a time and a structure for that which they would work out properly. Just not this day. Tessa held her hand for 11 hours. The baby arrived at 4:17 in the afternoon, which Naomi would later find darkly funny, given that 4:17 was the exact time she'd woken up the night of Valentina's text, lying in the dark with the city's ambient glow on Tessa's guest room ceiling. Same time. Different kind of arrival. A girl. She weighed 7 pounds and 2 ounces, and she had dark hair and Roman's particular way of going very still and looking at something with total focused attention, which Naomi saw for the first time in the delivery room when the baby turned her head toward the sound of Naomi's voice, and which made Naomi's chest do something large and complicated that she didn't try to name right away. She named her Clara, not a family name from either side, not a name that carried anyone else's history, her own choice, made alone, for her own reasons, in the particular way she intended to make all of the significant choices going forward. Clara Naomi Sterling, not Vescari. Roman sent flowers to the hospital, white, which she appreciated for its restraint. He sent a handwritten card that said only, "She is lucky to have you. R." She read it twice, set it on the bedside table, and did not show it to Tessa, and did not respond, and understood that it was the right amount of communication for where they were. She stayed in the hospital 2 days. She went to Tessa's apartment for 2 weeks after that. Because the house on the north side was in escrow, she'd agreed to sell it as part of the separation, neither of them wanting to maintain it, and both of their attorneys recommending clean separation of the physical assets, and the new place she'd found, floor-through in a building on the west side with good light, and a room she was going to make into a proper home office, wasn't ready yet. She didn't mind the delay. Tessa's apartment, with its doorman and its impersonal quiet and its guest room where she'd spent the most important nights of the previous months, felt right for the transition. She sat on Tessa's couch, with Clara in her arms in the early mornings while the city woke up outside the window, and she thought about things in the open, unhurried way she hadn't been able to think about anything in months. She thought about Marcus Hale. Roman, in the weeks following their conference room meeting, had entered into cooperation negotiations with Mercer's office. The specifics were not shared with Naomi, and she didn't ask for them. She had Patricia keeping track of what was relevant to her legal situation, and what happened above Roman's level in the organizational structure was no longer her geometry to understand. She knew from Patricia that the information Roman provided about Marcus Hale and the people above him in the chain was significant, that it had opened investigative doors, that the inquiry had been trying to find for some time, that whatever Roman was going to lose, and he was going to lose a great deal, his cooperation had changed the shape of what remained possible for him. She didn't know how to feel about that. She decided that was acceptable. Not everything required a feeling she could name cleanly. Some things just were what they were, and the work was carrying them without letting them become the center of things. Valentina called her once. Late April. Naomi almost didn't answer. She answered, "I want you to know." Valentina said, without preamble, that I did not know the full scope of what Roman had constructed around your company. I knew the structure existed. I did not know the degree to which your name was the intended absorption point. Did it change what you would have done if you'd known? Pause that told her more than the answer would have. I'm telling you because I want you to understand the difference, Valentina said. I understand the difference between what you knew and what you would have done about it, Naomi said. I'm asking if the difference was significant. Another pause. Protected the family, Valentina said, the way I always have. I protected it at costs I am currently accounting for. Her voice, for the first time in Naomi's experience of her, had something underneath the composure that was not quite grief, but lived in the same neighborhood. I'm told you named the baby Clara. Yes, it's a good name. A pause. I'd like to meet her. When and if you're willing. I understand if you're not. Naomi looked at Clara, asleep in the bouncer seat, across the room with the absolute, consuming unconsciousness of a person who has not yet learned that the world is complicated. I'll think about it, she said. She didn't say yes. She didn't say no. She left it in the shape of something that might become a decision when she had more distance. Valentina accepted this with a dignity that Naomi found, against her own inclinations, slightly moving. They hung up. The West Side apartment was ready in May. She moved in on a Saturday with Tessa and two people from her Sterling Events team who had stayed with the company through everything, Renata, who handled logistics, and Phil, who managed client relations, and who had each, in their own way, demonstrated over the preceding months a loyalty that Naomi had not asked for and would not forget. The apartment had west-facing windows that caught the afternoon light in a way that made the rooms feel larger than they were. She'd bought furniture carefully. Nothing carried over from the North Side house. Everything new or chosen for its own quality, rather than for how it fit into a pre-existing aesthetic. The home office had a desk facing the window, and a shelf she intended to fill slowly with things that meant something rather than quickly, with things that merely looked appropriate. Clara's room was yellow, not the neutral, hedging yellow of a room that can't commit. A real yellow, warm and decided, with white trim and a changing table and a second-hand rocking chair that Tessa had found at an estate sale and restored with more care than the price required. Naomi stood in that room on the first evening in the apartment, with Clara in her arms and the yellow walls around her, and the city outside the window doing its evening thing, and she felt something that she didn't try to analyze right away. Let it be what it was. She had been standing in various versions of devastation for 7 months. She had moved through them, not around them, not above them, through them, the way you go through something when going around is not an available direction. She had documented and filed and testified and negotiated and signed and refused to held herself together in rooms full of people who were trying to use her situational position to advance their own, and she had done all of it while her body was doing the separate enormous work of growing a human being who was now asleep against her shoulder with the specific trustful weight of a person who has no reason yet to hold themselves up. She thought about the wedding anniversary night, the hotel parking lot, the 37 seconds of video. She thought about saying happy anniversary and driving away, and the particular dissociated clarity of those first hours, and the instinct that had used the word evidence before she knew why. She thought about Tessa saying don't go home yet. She thought about Patricia Hale reading 40 pages in silence and then asking the exact right question. She thought about Bianca calling at 3 rings, afraid and not entirely innocent, and choosing to reach out anyway, and the complicated grace of that choice. She thought about Roman in the conference room, above the river, saying she is lucky to have you not as a man managing his narrative, just as a man who knew her and meant what he said. She thought about what the next year looked like. Sterling Events had 3 major national contracts pending, one in New York, one in Los Angeles, one in Chicago, representing the largest scope of work she'd ever taken on. The story of the injunction and the federal investigation, and the woman who had documented her husband's financial crime sections, while 8 months pregnant, had moved through the industry, with the particular speed of things that confirm what people already privately believed about the intersection of power and exploitation. The clients weren't hiring her out of sympathy. They were hiring her because the story demonstrated a specific bankable quality. Under maximum pressure, she had been precise, organized, and undefeated. That was exactly the quality you wanted in someone running a large event. She had a staff meeting Monday morning. She had a call with Patricia Tuesday about the final remaining piece of the legal separation. She had a pediatric appointment Thursday for Clara's 2-month check. She had a dinner with Tessa on Friday that Tessa had described only as mandatory, and which Naomi suspected involved other people and possibly a celebration she hadn't asked for and would not have the heart to cancel. She had a life, not the one she had built inside Romans, not the one she'd been living in, shaped around the dimensions of someone else's requirements. Something smaller right now, and more distinctly hers, and expandable in directions she was only beginning to see. Clara shifted against her shoulder, made a small, unintelligible sound, resettled. "I know," Naomi said. She stood in the yellow room until the light changed. The city outside the window moved through its evening, in its perpetual, indifferent, beautiful way, 10,000 lives in motion in every direction, none of them knowing or caring about the specific geography of what Naomi Sterling had come through to be standing exactly here, in this room, with this child, in this light. That indifference was not unkind. It was just the world being the world, large and various and fully occupied with itself, which was all you could reasonably ask of it. She had occupied herself with it too, for 7 months and survived. She would go on occupying it, the baby's weight in her arms, the yellow walls, the west-facing light going the particular amber of early evening. Roman Vescari had believed that her revenge would be the video. He had spent weeks calculating around the public exposure of his affair, the damage to his reputation, the particular humiliation of a powerful man caught. He had been wrong about that. And he had been wrong about what she was made of, which was a mistake she did not think he would make again, and which no longer mattered because he was no longer the person she was making herself legible to. She was making herself legible to Clara. She was making herself legible to the version of Naomi Sterling that existed on the other side of the parking lot, and the guest room, and the 3 a.m. kitchen, and the courthouse steps, and the conference room table, and all the territory in between. She turned off the overhead light. She sat in the rocking chair in the last of the window's amber, with her daughter against her chest, and she rocked, and she breathed, and she did not think about what she had lost. She thought about the yellow walls. She had chosen them herself. That was enough for tonight. She didn't find out what she hadn't accounted for until 6:14 the following morning. Patricia called while Naomi was in Tessa's kitchen, standing in the gray pre-dawn light with a glass of water she hadn't drunk yet. The specific sleeplessness of late pregnancy having replaced the sleeplessness of crisis without any gap between them. She answered on the first ring. Cora Sutton talked, Patricia said. No greeting. The voice of a woman who had been awake for some time and had passed through the part of the night where you observe normal social conventions. She came in voluntarily at 11 p.m. with her attorney. She gave Mercer's team a full account. Naomi set the water glass down. What did she give them? Everything she knew about the document structure, the specific dates of each transfer through Sterling events, the methodology she used to generate contracts under your letterhead. But Naomi Patricia paused in a way that was not dramatic, just the pause of someone choosing their words with the specific care of information that carries weight. Cora Sutton was not sent by Roman. The kitchen went very quiet. Say that again, Naomi said. Cora Sutton was placed inside your company by the people above Roman in the organizational structure, not by Roman directly. He knew she was there, he used the access she provided. But he did not plant her. She was placed there as a condition of the arrangement that kept the investigation from reaching the tier above his operations. The people above him required an observable exposure point inside Sterling events. Cora was their instrument, not his. Naomi stood very still with one hand on the counter and the other hanging at her side. He knew she was there, she said slowly, but he didn't put her there. He accepted the condition that put her there, which is not meaningfully different from a legal standpoint. But from the standpoint of what he was willing to do versus what was done to him, Patricia stopped. I'm not telling you this to generate sympathy for Roman. I'm telling you because Cora's account changes the scope of who is actually being investigated at the tier above him, and because Mercer is going to ask you this morning whether this information changes anything about your cooperation. Does it change what I have to provide? No, but it may change what happens to Roman's cooperation negotiations. People above him put a mechanism inside your marriage without his full authorization. That's leverage he didn't know he had. Naomi thought about Roman's voicemail. Stripped voice. She thought about the conference room meeting that was scheduled for that afternoon, and the thing she hadn't known 24 hours ago that she knew now, and whether it changed the shape of what needed to be said. I'll be at your office at 8, she said. She was there at 7:55. Mercer arrived at 8:15 with Agent Flores and a third person Naomi hadn't seen before, a compact, quiet man named Reyes, who was introduced with a title that indicated he operated at a level above Mercer in the organizational structure of the investigation. His presence confirmed, without anything being said directly, that Kara's Sutton account had elevated the scope of what was happening into a different register. They went through everything again, not because the information had changed, but because Reyes needed to hear it in the room, in Naomi's voice, calibrated against what Cora had provided and what Roman's attorneys had begun to outline in preliminary cooperation discussions. When they finished, Reyes looked at her for a moment, with the particular attention of someone taking a final measurement. Mrs. Vescari, he said, the individuals at the organizational tier above your husband's operations have been the primary target of a coordinated federal inquiry for approximately 3 years. The financial structures your husband's enterprises provided were the access point we have been unable to fully document until the last 8 days. He paused. What you've provided, combined with Ms. Moretti's cooperation and Ms. Sutton's account, has closed that gap. I want you to understand the scale of what that means. This is not about your husband's affairs or your marriage, or even the specific crimes committed through your company. This is about a structure of financial crime that reaches into legitimate institutions in 4 states. You are the reason that structure is now visible in a way that can be prosecuted. Naomi looked at him steadily. She was tired in a way that was too complete to feel dramatic. Just the flat, total tiredness of a person who has been operating at maximum capacity for 5 consecutive days on compromised sleep while 8 months pregnant. She was tired, and she was clear, which was a combination she was starting to understand as her particular mode of crisis function. What happens to me, she said, concretely. What is my exposure now? Reyes looked at Patricia first. A brief look that was not asking permission, just acknowledging the professional architecture of the room. Based on Cora Sutton's account confirming the mechanism of the forgery, and your own documentation establishing that the irregular activity occurred, without your knowledge or participation, he said, our current assessment is that you have no criminal exposure. The forged signatures are confirmed as forgeries. The vendor structure is confirmed as externally imposed. Your tax identification number was used without authorization. You are a victim of the financial crime, not a participant in it. He paused. That assessment is final, barring information that contradicts what we currently have. We do not anticipate such information, she breathed. A real breath, not the controlled kind. Just air, moving in and out, the body doing the thing it needed to do. Thank you, she said. She left Patricia's office at 10:30 and drove to the North Side house to collect the last physical items she needed before the afternoon's conference room meeting with Roman. She had a key. Technically, it was still her home until the sale finalized. She had not been inside since the night she'd left with her bag and her folder. The house had the quality of a place that had been recently emptied of the particular energy that made it inhabited. Roman was not there. She'd confirmed with Patricia's office that he had a morning meeting with his legal team on the other side of the city. The rooms were the same rooms, same furniture, same framed photographs on the walls, but they had the slightly removed quality of a film set after the production has wrapped. The life that had happened in here no longer lived here. It had moved somewhere else without the furniture following it. She went to the bedroom. The engraved watch was still on the nightstand in this room where she'd left it the night she first put it face down. She stood looking at it for a moment. Then she picked it up and held it in both hands, the slight weight of it, and she turned it over and read the back. 10 years. Still you. She stood there with it for a while. Not sentimentally, just long enough to let the object be what it was, not a symbol, not evidence, not a prop in a story about betrayal. Just a watch she'd chosen with care for a person she'd loved, and had paid a craftsman to engrave with words she'd meant at the time, and had carried to a hotel parking lot on an anniversary night that had become the most significant night of her life for reasons entirely different from the one she'd planned for. She put it in her bag. She didn't know yet what she would do with it. She didn't need to know today. She left the house without looking at the Sardinia photograph. The conference room was the same one Patricia had arranged for. Same gray river view, same long table, same quality of light in the afternoon. Roman was already there again, same as before, and stood when she entered, same reflex. He looked worse than he had the last time she'd seen him. Not dramatically Roman's, was not someone whose deterioration showed dramatically, but the diminishment she'd observed before had advanced. He had the look of someone who had received significant information in the preceding hours and was still integrating it. He knew about Cora. She could see it in the way he looked at her when she sat down. Not the managed look of their previous meetings, something more exposed. More she searched for the right word and arrived at, honest. Their attorneys settled at the far end of the table. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Cora Sutton, he said. Yes, she said. I knew she was there. I need you to know that I understood what her presence meant, and I used it. I am not going to pretend otherwise. He held her gaze. I did not put her there. That decision was made above me, as a condition I was required to accept. I accepted it. Those are not different things legally, and I'm not asking you to treat them as different things. I'm telling you because I need you to have the accurate version. Why does it matter whether I have the accurate version? She asked. Not combatively. A real question. He looked at the river for a moment. Because you spent 10 years with the inaccurate version, and I was responsible for that, he said. I can't fix that, but I can stop adding to it. She looked at him. The man across the table had the specific hollowness of someone in the process of being reduced to what was essential, after everything constructed on top of that essential thing had been systematically removed. She had watched it happen in increments over the past week. She was watching the current stage of it now. What did you trade to keep the investigation from reaching me originally? She said. 18 months ago. What was the concession? His jaw tightened. That's part of my cooperation agreement. I can't. I know you can't give me the legal specifics. I'm asking what it cost you personally, not for evidence. I need to understand the shape of it. A long silence. His hands on the table were still. The river moved behind him. Marcus Hale was my closest ally in that structure, he said. We'd worked together for 11 years. I gave Mercer's predecessors enough information about his specific role in the document transfers that they were able to formalize their inquiry around him as the primary target. He became the absorption point instead of you. He stopped. He knew it was me. He called me the day before he died. I didn't answer. The room held that. Naomi thought about a man calling someone he'd trusted for 11 years on the day before he died, and the phone not being answered. She thought about the particular specific brutality of that, which was not dramatic, but was absolute in the way that small, quiet things are sometimes more absolute than large, loud ones. Were you responsible for what happened to him? She asked. No, flat, certain. The people above me made that decision without my knowledge. When I found out, he stopped. He pressed his hands flat on the table, and for a moment she saw, underneath everything, she'd spent the last week learning about him, the man she'd sat next to at 2 a.m., when he couldn't sleep and wouldn't say why, and now she understood some of what those nights had contained. When I found out, I understood what the structure I'd built myself into was actually capable of. That's when the cooperation negotiations began. Not because I was caught, because I understood what I was part of. She sat with that. It didn't exonerate him. It didn't undo the accounts or the forged signatures or the 14 months with Bianca or the 10 years of managed distance between what his world was and what he'd allowed her to see of it. It didn't give back the version of herself she'd been before the parking lot. It was not a redemption. It was just a human thing, a man who had built himself into a structure that was capable of killing someone he trusted and who had arrived at the full knowledge of that, and who was now living inside that knowledge without anywhere to put it. She understood it without forgiving it. I'm going to ask you something, she said, and I need the true answer, not the managed one. He nodded once. If none of this had surfaced, If I hadn't been in that parking lot, if the investigation had continued along the path it was on, would there have come a point where you dismantled what you'd built around my company? Where you removed my name from those documents? Where you found another way? He held her gaze for the full duration of the silence that followed. She nodded. It was the most honest answer he'd given her in 10 years, and it was the one that closed the door most completely. And she was grateful for both of those things simultaneously, in a way that did not require resolution. The separation agreement, she said, sign it today. Don't wait. I'll call Leonard when I leave here. And the cooperation with Mercer. Give them everything. Not for me, because Marcus Hale deserves it. Something moved in his face at the name. A fast internal movement, the kind that happens below conscious control. Yes, he said. She stood. The attorney stirred. She picked up her bag. She stood on her side of the table and looked at Roman Vescari for what she understood, with a clarity that was not sad so much as complete. Was the last time she would look at him in this particular way. Not the last time she would see him. There would be co-parenting logistics, legal obligations, the specific ongoing architecture of two people who had made a child together and would spend the next 2 decades navigating that fact. She would see him, but she would not look at him like this again, with this particular combination of knowledge and loss and the residue of a love that had been real, even when everything surrounding it was not. Take care of yourself, she said. He looked like the words cost him something. You too, he said, both of you. She walked out. Tessa was not in the lobby this time. Naomi had come alone, with Patricia's reluctant approval, because she'd needed to. Some things required you to arrive and leave under your own power, without someone waiting to absorb the aftermath. She stood outside the building for a moment, in the cold afternoon air. The river was visible at the end of the block, moving the way it always moved, that slow, muscular, perpetual motion that owed nothing to the business of the people alongside it. She walked to her car. She drove to Tessa's apartment. She let herself in with the key Tessa had given her in the second week, which felt like a different geological era from where she was standing now. She set her bag on the counter. She sat on Tessa's couch. She put her hands on her stomach and felt the baby move, that familiar roll and kick, the most constant thing in her life for the last several months. She sat like that for a long time. She was not all right in the sense that she was whole and uninjured. She was not all right in the sense that the last week had left no mark. She was all right in the sense of still being present, still being the person doing the sitting and the breathing and the ongoing work of figuring out what came next. That was the all right. That was the only kind of all right that was actually available to human beings who had been through something real, and she was no longer interested in the other kind. At 5 o'clock, Tessa came home. She looked at Naomi on the couch and read whatever was in her face with the long-practiced accuracy of genuine friendship and said nothing for a moment. She put her bag down. She went to the kitchen and came back with 2 glasses of water and sat beside Naomi and handed her one. They sat. Done? Tessa asked. Done, Naomi said. Tessa nodded. She didn't ask for details. She would ask later, probably, when Naomi was ready to give them, and Naomi would give them, and Tessa would listen, the way she always listened, fully, without interpolation, saving her own responses for when they were needed rather than filling the space they weren't. It was among the most valuable things about her. What do you need right now? Tessa said. Naomi thought about it. I need to figure out what I'm going to name her, she said. Tessa turned to look at her. I keep going back and forth, Naomi said. I have a list, but nothing has landed the way I need it to land. Read me the list. She pulled out her phone and read the names she'd been accumulating in a note for the past 2 months. 7 names, different origins, different sounds, qualities of person she was imagining when she wrote each one down. Tessa listened to all of them. Clara, she said. Naomi looked at her. Why? Because it means clear, Tessa said. And because everything you've done in the last week has been about seeing clearly. Seems like the right word to give her at the start. Naomi sat with it. Clear. The thing she'd had, underneath the shock and the fear and the accumulated weight of 7 days, that had remade her life entirely. The thing that had moved her mom in the parking lot, that had sent her to Patricia's office, that had put her in the conference room today, had caught her in the conference room today, and let her ask the questions that needed asking and hear the answers that needed hearing, and walk out of the building still standing. Clear, Clara, she said. It landed. Yeah, Tessa said. They sat on the couch while the apartment went from afternoon to evening around them, the light changing through the windows in the particular way, that Chicago late winter light changed fast, then slower, then the specific blue-gray of a city evening that had its own quality distinct from the darkness proper. Naomi kept her hands on her stomach. The baby moved intermittently, those familiar signals that she'd learned to read over months of practice, and she answered each one silently in the way she'd been doing since the parking garage, when she first understood that whatever happened next, this was the person she was doing it for. Not for revenge, not to prove anything to Roman or to Valentina or to the structure above them that had put Cora Sutton inside her company and calculated her worth as a contingency point. For this, for the person she hadn't met yet, who was going to need her to have been clear. Stayed on Tessa's couch until 8 o'clock. Then she went to the guest room and lay down in her clothes and closed her eyes. And this time, for the first time in 6 days, something in her body recognized that the acute phase was over. Not the work would continue for months, the legal separation and the business rebuilding, and the ongoing construction of a life on her own terms. But the crisis itself, the specific sustained emergency of the last 6 days, had passed into something different, something that was going to be hard without being an emergency. She was built for hard without emergency. She slept for 9 hours. In the morning, she called Patricia and confirmed that the separation agreement had been signed. She called her operations team and scheduled a full company meeting for the following week to outline the path forward for Sterling events. She called the hospital to confirm her next prenatal appointment. She ate breakfast sitting at Tessa's kitchen table with the winter sun coming through the window at the angle it came through at 9 in the morning. And she thought about the yellow she was going to paint the baby's room in the West Side apartment that wasn't ready yet, but would be. She had chosen yellow before she chose the name. Now they fit together. Clara, in a yellow room, in a city that was indifferent to her mother's history, and therefore capable of containing any future her mother built inside it. The engraved watch was in her bag. She took it out and set it on the table beside her coffee cup and looked at it in the morning light. The dark face, the simple gold hands, the weight of it that she'd carried through a hotel parking lot and a courthouse and a conference room above a river. She turned it over. 10 years, still you. She thought about those 4 words and what they'd meant when she chose them and what they meant now, and whether meaning was something that stayed attached to language or whether it moved when the people inside it moved. She decided the watch was not going to be a wound she carried. She was going to look at it and know that she had loved someone truly, and that the love had been real, even when the person had not been fully what she'd believed, and that loving truly was not the same as loving wisely, and that she intended to do both from now on, love truly, and also keep her eyes open, because those were not mutually exclusive things, no matter how often the architecture of a particular relationship required you to believe they were. She put the watch on, not because it meant what it had meant, because it was a good watch, and she had chosen it carefully, and she was done letting Roman Vescari's choices determine what she kept and what she gave up. She wore it. She finished her coffee. She called Tessa at the office and left a message saying she was fine and thank you, and she would explain everything that evening. Then she opened her laptop and began writing the business plan for the expanded version of Sterling events that she'd been building in the back of her mind for the last 6 days, in the margins of everything else. She wrote for 3 hours. When she stopped, she sat back and looked at what she'd produced, not a finished document, just the beginning of a shape, the first outline of something that had been accumulating pressure behind everything else she had to handle and was now ready to be built. It was good. She knew it was good not because it was perfect, but because it was exactly what she knew how to do, which was make complex things happen in ordered, precise, elegant ways that looked effortless from the outside and were anything but, and nobody in her life had ever taught her that. She'd built it herself, inside the marriage, in the margins of someone else's empire. In the space, Roman had kept small because small was useful to him. She was going to make it very large, not for him, not against him. For the person who had been standing in a hotel parking lot in a blue dress, 8 months pregnant, and had raised her phone with shaking hands and pressed record because something underneath everything else knew that what she was, but seeing mattered and needed to be witnessed and kept. That person deserved the large version. She saved the document. She closed the laptop. Outside the window, Chicago was doing what Chicago did in February, cold gray moving, fully occupied with itself in all directions. indifferent and alive. She looked at it for a moment. The city she had lived in for 20 years. The city her daughter was going to be born in approximately 3 weeks. In a hospital 2 miles from the apartment with yellow walls. She was not the woman who had driven to that hotel anniversary night. She was also not a woman who had emerged from devastation into some clean, unscathed new self on the other side. That was not how it worked. She had been changed by what she'd been through in ways she was only beginning to understand. And some of those changes were going to keep arriving for years. The flinch at particular kinds of trust, the moments of recalibration when someone's care for her prompted the involuntary question of what it was actually for. She was going to carry that. She was also going to carry the watch on her wrist, and the company in her laptop, and the name she'd chosen for her daughter, and the specific, durable, undefeated clarity that had moved through her, like a current since the parking garage, and had not gone out once, not in the worst moments, not at 3 a.m. in Tessa's guest room, not in the conference room above the river. She was going to carry all of it. That was what surviving something real looked like, not the clean exit, not the triumphant new beginning with the past neatly behind it. Just the morning after, and the morning after that, and the ongoing ordinary extraordinary work of a person building their life back from the inside out, with their hands, with what they knew, with the people who stayed. She put her coat on. She had a city to move through. She moved through it.